Good evening, traveller. Tonight we will stroll across silent fields of old battles. On every field we will meet one brave soul who stepped out alone when thousands held back. With a single swing or a single choice, that fighter pushed the whole war onto a new road. Stay close. The ground is rough, but the stories are gentle. Before we start, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy these stories and they help you fall asleep. In the comments, let me know the last thing you remember hearing before you drifted off. Okay, lights low. Breathe in, breathe out. Our first stop is Thermopylae, where a king and 300 friends took their stand. Imagine waking up on a late summer morning in 480 BCE and discovering your day's agenda is a single bullet point. Hold back the largest invasion force the world has ever seen and probably die doing it. Leonidas of Sparta is a middle-aged king with sore knees from decades of hoplite drills, a restless Spartan council breathing down his neck, and only 300 full-time bodyguards. The famous 300 to lean on. Yet when the Persians under Xerxes roll toward Greece like a corporate takeover, Leonidas knows exactly where to make his stand, a narrow seaside path called Thermopylae. At its tightest, the track is barely wide enough for a pair of chariots. For a Spartan, that is practically an invitation. Persian scouts arrive first and report something that sounds like a glitch in the system. The Greeks are combing their hair and stretching. From Xerxes' perspective, this is either terrifying confidence or the ancient equivalent of trolling. He sends a courteous demand to lay down arms. Leonidas replies, "Come and take them." In modern terms, that is the tactical version of "hold my beer." The first morning of battle begins with clouds of arrows so thick they blot the sun. A Spartan quips that they will fight in the shade, which in 2025 would be a tweet that goes instantly viral. Shield walls lock, spears jab. The narrow pass funnels thousands of Persians into a living wall of bronze and muscle. Whenever a Spartan in the front rank tires, Leonidas rotates him to the back like a self-cleaning meat grinder. By nightfall, Persian casualties are piling up and the Spartan camp feels less like a funeral vigil and more like a locker room dance party, push-ups, black broth, gallows humor. Day 2. Xerxes decides quantity is a quality all its own and unleashes the immortals, an elite regiment dressed to intimidate. They collide with a Spartan line that refuses to budge. Hoplites fight shoulder to shoulder, shields overlapping like scales on a dragon. When spears splinter, short swords appear. When swords dull, iron-edged shields become battering rams. The immortals discover that the nickname isn't literal. That evening, frustration boils in the Persian camp. Enter Ephialtes, a local shepherd who knows a goat path that bypasses the pass. In exchange for some quick cash and long-term infamy, he leads a Persian detachment over the ridge. Leonidas catches wind of the betrayal in the pre-dawn chill of day 3. He gathers the allied contingents and levels with them. Within hours, the Persians will slam into their rear. Most allies withdraw to fight another day. A band of Thespians insists on staying. A contingent of Thebans stays because leaving would look bad. The 300 Spartans never even consider retreat. Leonidas understands the politics of heroism. Sparta operates under a dual-king system. By choosing certain death, he quiets rivals at home and hands every Greek city-state a rallying cry. It is an ancient version of brand marketing. Sacrifice drives engagement. At sunrise, the Spartans and their remaining allies surge forward instead of waiting behind the wall. Leonidas wants open ground, space to swing a sword and send a message. The fighting is hand-to-hand chaos punctuated by the thud of arrows and the metallic scream of blades locking. Leonidas fights in the front rank, red cloak sliced open, helmet crest splintered, refusing to step back even when arrows pierce his armor. Eventually he collapses under a heap of broken spears and enemy bodies. His royal guards form a circle around the corpse, defending it until the last of them fall. By the end of that brutal morning, perhaps 20,000 Persians lie dead. Xerxes, furious that 3 days and countless soldiers have bought only tiny scraps of land, orders Leonidas's head nailed to a stake. It is a gesture so un-Persian that even his own officers shift nervously, but rage trumps protocol. Word of the stand travels south faster than any supply wagon. Everywhere Greek messengers repeat the same story. A king and a handful of soldiers held the line long enough for the rest of Greece to mobilize. In the months that follow, Greek fleets trap and smash the Persian navy at Salamis. Greek hoplites break Persian infantry at Plataea. Eventually, Xerxes retreats across the Hellespont. Years later, Sparta retrieves Leonidas's bones and buries them in a hero shrine. Poets etch lines of verse, orators recite them in crowded agoras, and even centuries later, Roman emperors visit the spot like fans visiting a legendary sports arena. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Leonidas's bronze-clad abs headline blockbuster films, gym posters, and motivational memes. The message remains the same: courage at the right choke point can make an empire bleed and an idea live forever. Cynaegiorus at Marathon. The early morning at the Bay of Marathon is warm enough to shimmer, a light haze softening the olive groves and the thin line where the surf meets the sand. 10,000 Athenians and a few hundred Plataeans wait on the low ridge, looking down at the Persian beachhead. In every direction, bronze helmets glint, spears tilt like reeds in a breeze, shields rest on dusty knees. Somewhere in the ranks stands Cynaegiorus, son of Euphorion, known in peacetime for a laugh that could rattle wine cups and a grip that could crack walnuts without the shell breaker. Persia has come to punish Athens for meddling in imperial business. Athens has come because, well, it is Tuesday and democracy does not negotiate under threat. The Persian fleet, 800 galleys strong, has ferried cavalry and archers across the Aegean, counting on speed and terror. The Athenians count on one advantage: a hoplite charge on firm ground can hit as hard as a freight train, and nobody in linen mail wants to be on the tracks. The trumpet signal finally slices through dawn. Hoplites surge forward, shields overlapping in a silver wall, sandals thudding in unison. They sprint the final 100 yards to close the distance before Persian archers can thin the line. Arrows snap overhead like dry twigs in a fire. Cynaegiorus keeps his shield high, feels the tremor of impacts, smells goose-feather fletchings as shafts glance away. Then the shield wall crashes into the Persian front, bronze on wicker, iron on leather, a collision loud enough to scare fish from the bay. For an hour, the battle is a grind of spear thrusts and sudden silences when one side yields a step. The Persian centre collapses first, crowded archers stumbling backward toward their ships. Greek wings fold inward like book covers, sealing the retreat. Marathon's sandy strip becomes a bottleneck where discipline dissolves. Panicked soldiers swarm the waterline, scrambling for the nearest gangplank. Cynegeirus sees a trireme pushing away, oars dipping in frantic rhythm. If that ship escapes, it carries not only survivors, but a story of Persian resilience. He wades into the shallows, helmet plume soaked, armor dragging. The gangplank is already hoisted. Sailors lean out with boarding poles to shove attackers back. Cynegeirus ignores the poles, leaps, and grabs the ship's stern ornament, a painted lion snarling against the blue. His fingers hook the rail. Salt spray slaps his face. He plants one foot on the hull, the other still in thigh-deep water, and pulls. Think of trying to hold a city bus that has just eased into first gear. Oars bite, the galley surges, timber groans. Cynegeirus's shoulders bunch beneath the bronze cuirass. All around him splash Persians swinging axes at his forearms. The first blade misses, the second bites. Blood sheets down the lion figurehead. He tightens his other hand, refusing to let go, muscles humming like a drawn bow. Another sailor swings. Wood chips fly where metal strikes rail, then bone. Cynegeirus's right hand, wrist to knuckles, severs clean. It tumbles into the froth, still curled as if clutching air. A normal man would sink or stagger back to shore. Cynegeirus does neither. He clamps the stump against the rail for leverage, reaches with his left, and catches a stray mooring rope that trails in the wake. His sandals skid on pebbles. The galley drags him forward, but for a heartbeat the ship slows. Other Greeks splash out, spears raised, shouting encouragement that is part prayer, part battle hymn. The delay is enough. A wave rocks the hull, beaching it on a sandbar. Hoplites swarm aboard, turning decks into a desperate brawl. Cynegeirus can no longer lift a weapon. He props himself against the keel, breath coming in sharp gusts, vision narrowing at the edges. Someone binds the stump with a strip torn from a cloak. It feels far away, disconnected from the roar of battle. He tastes seawater, iron, and something like victory. By afternoon, the beach is littered with wrecked hulls and spent arrows. Persian losses stand near 6,000, Athenian dead fewer than 200. Among them lies Cynegeirus, who bled out quietly where the tide could reach his sandals. His brothers, who also fought that day, reclaim the body and carry it inland for burial on the sacred road. The epitaph, later carved in stone, skips the gruesome details. It simply calls him the strongest right hand of Athens, even after it was gone. News of Marathon travels first by runner to the city, then by ship to every island that fears imperial tribute. In crowded agoras, men recount how one hoplite tried to anchor a fleeing trireme with nothing but conviction and an increasingly limited number of limbs. Children reenact the leap from dock to rail, landing in clouds of courtyard dust. Old potters paint silhouettes of a lone figure gripping a ship as if the sea itself were refusing to yield. Years later, when Greek playwrights need a quick reference for impossible determination, they name-drop Cynegeirus. Roman historians pick up the story and repackage it for their own legionary audiences. By late antiquity, the details blur, yet the image remains. A single soldier trying to drag an empire backward by the stern. The beach at Marathon returns to quiet, just dune grass tickling abandoned arrowheads and shallow pools reflecting gulls. But every tide that rolls in whispers the same cadence, water over sand in the rhythm of a heartbeat, an echo of the moment one man gripped cedar planks and said, without words, that retreat would cost at least a hand. Marcus Atilius Regulus. A pale moon hovers over the Mediterranean in 256 BCE, glazing the Roman fleet like wet clay left out to dry. In the flagship's tent, Consul Marcus Atilius Regulus smooths a map across a cedar table. Sicily is already under Roman pressure, but Regulus has persuaded the Senate to take the fight straight to Carthage. His reasoning is simple. If you want a fig, climb the tree, do not throw stones from the ground. Regulus is not famous in Rome for eloquence. He is famous for eyebrows so severe that junior officers stand straighter when he frowns. He owns a modest farm outside the city, grows olives, and pronounces the word luxury the way farmers pronounce blight. His fellow consul, Manlius Vulso, handles logistics. Regulus handles daring. And so 40,000 legionaries, 200 warships, and one dangerously confident farmer sail south, skimming past the limestone cliffs of North Africa. The landing at Cape Bon is almost easy. Carthaginian outposts do not expect a trans-sea invasion. Regulus marches inland, crushing detachments that try to harass his supply lines, then wins a sharp field battle near Ades. For a heartbeat, Rome tastes victory. Senators begin drafting proposals for new provinces and fresh taxes. Back home, merchants daydream of purple dye imported without Punic fees. But Carthage is not a city that folds after one bad harvest of luck. They hire Spartan mercenary commander Xanthippus, a veteran who respects Roman infantry but respects elephants more. He reorganizes Punic forces, massing heavy cavalry on the wings and forming a phalanx to pin the legions in the center. When the armies meet on the plain outside Tunis, early spring air smells of crushed fennel and elephant sweat. Regulus arranges his legions in the usual quincunx, short swords gleaming. He positions light troops forward to throw javelins at the elephants, hoping noise and sharp sticks will break the grey walls of muscle. It is not enough. 80 armoured elephants rumble forward, bells jangling, drivers prodding with goads the size of fence posts. The Roman front line ripples, then splits like cloth. Legionaries stumble under the weight of panic they have never practiced. Where the elephants charge, dust bursts upward like smoke, and footsteps pound hard enough to shake teeth. Carthaginian cavalry swings around the flanks, lances dropping like rowers' oars in perfect rhythm. Roman wings crack. Infantry in the centre stand their ground because that is what Romans do, but they stand alone. Regulus tries to improvise, sending reserves to plug gaps, but the plain offers no clever terrain, only sun-baked earth that reflects heat like a forge. By afternoon, the battle is a swirling mosaic of legion standards falling and Punic shields pressing forward. Regulus is captured while coordinating a stubborn rear guard that protects survivors fleeing toward the coast. Carthaginian spearmen surround him, surprised to find the Roman consul still barking orders instead of begging mercy. They bring him before the Council of Elders in Carthage, where polished stone floors make leather sandals whisper. The elders debate what to do with their unexpected trophy. Propaganda value shines brighter than gold. They decide to send Regulus to Rome with an embassy. He will deliver Carthage's peace terms, then swear an oath to return. The plan is elegant. A respected Roman consul recommending surrender could shorten the war and humiliate the Senate. If Regulus breaks his oath, Carthage gains moral high ground. If he keeps it, they regain their prisoner. Either outcome tastes sweet. Chains rattle only during boarding and disembarkation. On the voyage, Regulus is allowed to walk the deck, gaze at gulls, and compose thoughts. When he reaches Rome, crowds swell around his litter, hungry for a heroic tale rescued from barbarian captivity. He requests immediate audience with the Senate. Senators gather in white-roofed curia, expecting pleas for negotiation. Instead, Regulus plants himself like an olive stump and urges the war continue. He recounts Carthage's terms: heavy indemnity, release of prisoners, withdrawal from Sicily. He urges rejection. He tells the Senate an army once beaten can be beaten again, that Carthage's new tactics are a temporary fluke, that Rome must push harder. His voice is calm, but senators notice the raw wrists and sun-scoured cheeks. When a colleague suggests that honor does not require him to keep an oath extracted under duress, Regulus answers that a Roman's promise weighs more than bronze. The Senate applauds. Regulus bows once, collects no fanfare, and asks only that his wife be allowed to remarry if necessary. Then, escorted by Carthaginian envoys who look mildly astonished, he boards a trireme back to Africa. Legend claims he refuses food and comfort during the voyage, fearing indulgence might soften his resolve. Carthage receives him not with shackles, but with ceremony that feels like ice on bare teeth. The council offers one last chance: advise Rome to peace, and he may retire to a farm under moderate guard. Regulus declines. Punic patience snaps. Accounts diverge on what happens next. Some say he is locked in a small wooden cage that prevents sleep, eyelids scraping against reeds whenever they droop. Others insist iron spikes line the barrel where he is rolled downhill in the sun, every revolution a fresh line of fire across the skin. A Greek historian writes of a slow-drying hide wrapped around his body, shrinking each day until breath itself becomes a gamble. Ancient sources are as consistent as fishwives' gossip, but they agree on 2 points. The torment lasts days, and Regulus does not renounce his oath. When he dies, Carthaginian officials declare justice served. Roman merchants whisper horror in taverns, turning rumor into legend overnight. In the Forum, mothers teach children that a promise is worth at least as much as a consul's life. Playwrights dramatize Regulus pacing inside a nail-studded barrel, reciting prayers while stars spin above a courtyard he cannot see. Centuries later, Christian writers hold him up as a pagan preview of martyrdom. Modern historians debate the embellishments. Was the torture really that cruel, or did Roman propagandists use Regulus to stiffen public spine? The sources cannot settle the matter, yet the silhouette remains. A farmer, soldier who sailed across a sea, lost a battle, walked home only to argue for more war, then walked back into captivity because his word left no loophole. Waves still slap gently against the breakwater of ancient Carthage, now half sunk beneath modern Tunisian streets. Tour guides point to toppled columns and speak of trade routes, mosaics, and naval innovations. Few linger on the corner where a single Roman prisoner once stood in moonlit courtyard dust, calmly measuring the cost of honor in breaths, not coins. Boudica, the warrior queen of the Iceni. Wind scrapes across the heather of eastern Britannia, rattling the wicker fences around Iceni farms. It is AD 60, and Roman taxes have begun to feel less like administration and more like a slow bleed. Boudica, tall, flame-haired, a chieftain's widow, stands before her tribe in a wool cloak, dyed the dark purple Romans reserve for emperors. She wears it out of spite. The Roman procurator, a man whose official title is roughly guy who makes sure everyone pays up, has just seized her lands and ordered his legionaries to flog her in public. They add the extra insult of assaulting her teenage daughters, because nothing says civilization like gratuitous cruelty. Roman governors expect Britons to mutter, pay, and move on. Instead, they get a queen who decides that if Rome wants everything, Rome can try taking it from a battlefield. She rides north and west, rallying tribes who have stories of their own about scorched villages and missing sons. Britons who once traded quietly with legion forts now hammer sword hilts into chariot shafts. Druids read omens. A hare bolts the wrong way. The moon turns blood, red in mist. A spring runs thick like wine. Every sign points to one conclusion: time for the island to shake off its conquerors. Early summer, Roman veterans lounge in the Colonia of Camulodunum, modern Colchester, bragging about Gaul and cheap British ale. The lone garrison is small. The town's new temple to Emperor Claudius towers half-finished above tiled roofs. Boudicca's army storms through the southern gate so fast that local merchants barely manage to slam shutters. That temple, meant to project the might of Rome, becomes a final bunker. Afternoons of siege work shrink to hours. The roof collapses in smoke and sparks. When night falls, the Colonia is ash. News gallops down dusty roads to the provincial capital at Londinium, little more than a trading post of merchants and crooked timber warehouses. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, fresh from crushing Druids on Anglesey, realizes he's outnumbered perhaps 20-1. He evacuates, leaving a skeleton force and a note to the effect of, "Sorry, schedule conflict." Boudicca's forces arrive the next dawn. Warehouses go up like kindling, Roman citizens flee toward the Thames, and the river chokes with scorched barrels of wine and peppercorns. Somewhere on the march north of Verulamium, historians estimate Boudicca commands between 120 and 200,000 warriors, an angry crowd by ancient standards, a solid music festival crowd by modern ones. They bring scythed war chariots whose blades sing inches above the grass. Boudicca rides standing, daughters behind her, a spear balanced across the rail. She addresses the host in a clear voice. "We fight not as slaves, but as equals. Win today, and you live free. Lose, and you live no more." Not exactly TED Talk diction, but it gets the point across. Suetonius finally chooses ground. The exact location is lost, but imagine a narrow defile flanked by forests, mile-wide frontage, shrinking to a Roman-sized pocket. He has maybe 10,000 legionaries, auxiliary cavalry on the wings, and one good reason to trust in discipline: Romans will wedge into a defensive block while British warriors jostle for space. Boudicca wheels her chariot up and down the line, copper hair streaming, shouting that Roman arrogance ends today. Families follow in ox-drawn carts behind the army, expecting to witness the victory picnic. Trumpets clash. Iceni and Trinovantes surge ahead, painting the field with blue woad and crude humour aimed at shield walls. Roman pilar arc overhead, thudding into rawhide shields. The Britons push anyway, a tide of spears and slings. For a moment, sheer mass threatens to swallow the first Roman cohort. Then centurions bark cadence, shields lock, and legionaries step as one, an armoured piston punching into disorganised ranks. Auxiliary cavalry sweeps the flanks. Carts behind the Britons jam the only escape. In the crush, Boudicca's chariot weaves, searching for any breach. She sees the Roman line shift into a wedge like an axe head, carving deeper each minute. Warriors who minutes ago sang of freedom now slip on blood-slick grass. When the wedge meets the cart wall, Britons are trapped between blades and baggage. Some try scaling wagon tongues. Others hurl spears into the melee and strike their own kin by mistake. Boudicca knows the battle is collapsing. Even courage can't compensate for physics and training. Ancient chroniclers disagree on how she dies. Tacitus claims she drinks poison from a hollowed gourd rather than face capture. Cassius Dio tells of sudden illness days later. Oral traditions picture her driving the chariot straight into the Roman wedge, spear levelled, leaving hoofprints in mud and memory. However it ends, Roman soldiers never produce her body. Rumours spread of burial in a secret forest cave, or beneath a riverbank where waters murmur her name when wind lashes the reeds. The revolt burns out in a single day's slaughter. Roman estimates count 80,000 Britons dead, but numbers in ancient reports wander like sheep. Survivors scatter to fen and hill. Suetonius, alarmed by losses on his own side, hardens policy, confiscations, floggings, disarmament. Yet the province never feels quite stable again. Every time a legionary cook hears distant drums echo through mist, he remembers that an entire colonia once vanished before sunset. 2 millennia later, a bronze statue of Boudicca stands near Westminster Bridge in London, chariot wheels frozen mid-charge, daughters clutching railings. Commuters hurry past, earbuds humming, unaware their morning route follows roads first paved to chase her down. Late at night, when traffic thins and the Thames laps softly against pilings, street lamp reflections flicker on bronze like torchlight on armour. The warrior queen rides forever, wheels fixed toward a city that exists only because she failed to burn it twice. Decius Mus and the Vow of Devotio. A pale dawn lifts over the rolling fields of central Italy in 295 BC, bringing mist that drifts around oak trunks like slow fire. On one side of the plain, tens of thousands of Gauls and Samnites shout challenge songs and clatter sword against shield. Across a narrow stream stands the Roman host, 2 consular armies lined in the familiar checkerboard of maniples. Within the Roman ranks, Publius Decius Mus, one of the 2 consuls for the year, adjusts his scarlet cloak and feels for the leather packet that holds his father's funeral token. The name Decius Mus already carries weight. 45 years earlier, his father, also a consul, rode straight into a Latin line at the Battle of Vesuvius after uttering a ritual vow that offered his own life to the gods in exchange for victory. Romans call the rite devotio a bargain struck with the underworld. The elder Decius fell, the enemy broke, and the story became campfire lore. Publius has heard it since childhood, the way modern kids hear bedtime superheroes, except this hero is a blood relative and the bedtime moral runs. If the army wavers, you pay the bill yourself. Now the sun faces a coalition just as dangerous. The Samnites fight with curved shields and a grudge from decades of defeat. The Gauls arrive tall and bare, chested, lime in their hair, trumpets that sound like wounded cattle. Between the armies lies the plain of Sentinum, open ground with only a few low ridges and scattered stone fences. Perfect cavalry country, terrible for second thoughts. At first light, the consuls confer. Marcus Attilius Regulus, no relation to our previous chapter's hero, but an ancestor in obstinacy, takes the left wing. Decius commands the right, directly opposite the Gauls, whose horned helmets gleam bronze in the sunrise. Priests read omens. Sacred chickens peck grain calmly, a sign interpreted as neither good nor bad. In other words, any miracle today will be handcrafted. The signal horns blow. Roman skirmishers dash forward, hurling light javelins, then fall back behind the heavy infantry. The first clash sends a ripple through the whole line, like fabric pulled tight. Gauls drive spears with long arms, creating a fence of points. Samnite swords hammer Roman scooter, sparks jumping off metal rims. For an hour, the front surges and recedes, dust rising until helmets look dipped in clay. Decius sees trouble forming on his wing. The Gaulish chariots have found a gap between two maniples and are circling behind, throwing javelins into exposed backs. Legionaries wobble, centurions scream orders swallowed by shouting and pipe music. Decius rides along the cohort front, voice hoarse, trying to splice courage into tired men. The line holds but bends like a bowstring about to snap. He reins in at the crest of a slight rise, where he can see the whole field. The left wing presses forward, Regulus pushing Samnites toward a marshy dip. His own right wing bleeds ground. Decius remembers his father's vow, the exact Latin, the precise gestures. He calls for the pontifex attached to the army, Marcus Livius Denta, an elderly priest whose look suggests he hoped this campaign would stay theoretical. On a small altar, hastily assembled from shield bosses and a spear driven into the turf, the priest recites the formula. Decius repeats, touching his chest, then the earth, then raising his palms to the sky. He vows his life and those of the enemy hosts to the gods of the dead and to Mother Earth, a spiritual IOU written in flesh. As the final words leave his mouth, he orders his lictors to stand aside. Spurring his horse, Decius charges alone toward the Gaulish centre. The act is part tactic, part theatre. Roman soldiers pause, stunned by the flash of crimson cloak cutting across no man's land. Gauls, seeing a single rider, think at first some envoy has lost his map. Then, spears swing toward him. Decius never slows. One javelin glances off his bronze breastplate. Another pierces the horse's flank. Animal and rider crash into the first rank of Gaulish spearmen, toppling a knot of warriors like ninepins. Swords hack down. Dust swirls, hiding details, but Roman standards on the ridge catch the sudden burst of cheers from enemy throats and know what it means. The consul is gone. Devotio is complete. A strange stillness hangs for a heartbeat. Then something shifts. Roman legionaries who moments ago braced for retreat begin to advance, not all at once, but in contagious steps. Officers seize the moment and press the horn signal for a general push. On the left, Regulus sees dust clouds rising higher on Decius' flank and guesses the vow has been made. He orders a flanking move through the marsh despite the sticky ground. Auxiliary cavalry splashes in, cutting off Samnite withdrawal. In the centre, the Gauls stand over Decius's crumpled form, uncertain whether this lone death is omen or accident. Before consensus, the Roman right wing slams back into them, shields punching, short swords driving under tall shields into ribs. Legion discipline begins to tell. Manipular gaps open and close with choreographed precision, blades flashing in practiced arcs. Gaulish lines buckle in confusion. By late afternoon, the coalition collapses. The Samnites flee north toward Apennine hills. Gauls scatter into oak woods where Roman scouts refuse to follow after sunset. Official tallies claim 30,000 enemy dead. A number army accountants probably chose for its pleasing roundness. Roman losses are steep but acceptable if one is comfortable putting a consul in the column marked expenditure. Soldiers find Decius's body near splintered chariot timbers. His horse lies across his legs, its flank feathered with spears. They place wreaths of oak leaves on the corpse and carry it on a shield to the camp, moving with a hush remarkable for men still vibrating with victory. That night, a pyre rises just beyond the ditch, flames painting red strokes on every helmet rim. Before dawn, the ashes are gathered into a bronze urn that will travel back to Rome for burial beside his father. 2 generations, 2 vows, 1 family story polished brighter than any statue in the Forum. In the years that follow, schoolboys memorize the tale of the Decii as proof that Rome wins wars not only with drill, but with an unspoken agreement between citizen and state. Sometimes the bill comes due in person. Senators cite the example during debates on conscription. Poets fold it into epic verse. Even emperors centuries later commission busts of the 2 consuls to remind spectators where ultimate loyalty should point. On the quiet farmland where the battle once raged, poppies grow thick every spring. Shepherds claim that on misty mornings a rider in a red cloak can be seen trotting the ridge before fading into light that feels neither dawn nor midday, as if the vow still circles the field looking for the next balance ode. Jan Žižka, the blind general of Bohemia. The first thing most people notice about Jan Žižka is what he's missing. One eye lost to a quarrel long before history bothered to remember him, the other blinded by a splinter at the siege of Rabi. By the summer of 1420, he can't see the rolling wheat fields south of Prague at all, but he can still sense slope, wind, and the creak of wagon axles in exactly the way a sailor reads a change in tide. If you serve in the Hussite camps, you learn quickly that Žižka's darkness is not your opportunity, it's his advantage. The kingdom of Bohemia is torn between followers of Jan Hus, who preached communion for the laity and a church with fewer gilded rings, and the forces of King Sigismund, who wants a neat return to business as usual. Emperor Sigismund calls a crusade. Žižka calls for more wagons. Ordinary farm carts are rimmed with iron plates, slits for crossbows, little hatches for handguns, novelties that smell of sulphur and upset older knights who still trust flesh to steel alone. On a brisk July dawn, the crusading army approaches Witkov Hill, a narrow ridge northeast of Prague overlooking the Vltava. Sigismund's men boast heavy cavalry, long lineages, and banners stitched in gold thread. Žižka commands perhaps 1,000 peasants, teamsters, and town militia. He stations the wagons in a half-moon on the crest, lashings creaking, oxen hauled back behind makeshift trenches. Beneath each cart crouch men and women with flails, billhooks, and whatever passed for a family firearm. The general paces behind the line, tapping the wagon spokes with a walking stick, counting, listening, mapping the positions in memory. Someone jokes you could swap 2 carts and he'd still rearrange the guns by sound alone. No one wagers against it. Mid-morning, German and Hungarian knights spur uphill, lances angled like a forest uprooted and set to gallop. They expect the usual arithmetic. Shock of horse plus weight of armor, enemy line shatters. Instead, they meet stakes driven into the clay, chains between wagons, and the thud crack of pavé-sized shields, opening ports for crossbow quarrels. From inside each wooden box comes a cough of black powder guns, small, clumsy weapons. But at 20 paces, they punch through a knight's hauberk with the finality of an overdue tax. Horses scream, momentum folds, men tumble under hooves and wheels. Zhizka listens to the cadence of fire, the way a drummer measures a march. When he hears a lull, he sends teenagers with spare bolts and powder horns scurrying along the inside of the line. He doesn't need eyes to know who's running low. He can tell by the silence. The Crusaders regroup, drag in siege ladders, and attempt to swarm the flank where the ridge tapers. Zhizka's response is almost casual. A quick order, and 5 wagons pivot like a barn door swinging on hinges. The tops of the carts drop to form a rampart. Arquebusiers pop up like angry gophers. Flails stand ready behind. A chronicler later writes that the knights looked like silver fish pinned on a cook's fork, which feels uncharitable to fish. Afternoon sun leans west. Knights charge again because that is what tradition demands. This time, Hussite cavalry, light, fast, the kind of riders who grew up racing clouds across Moravian pastures, burst from behind the hill and cut into the Crusader rear. Dust erupts, orders jumble, and suddenly the ridge that seemed a small obstacle becomes a cliff of wagon corners and downhill panic. By dusk, Sigismund's banners withdraw across the Vltava in ragged adherence to dignity. Zhizka's men cheer, and someone starts a hymn in Czech that rolls through the ravine like slow thunder. The general does not join the singing. He stands with one hand on a wagon shaft, feeling the vibration of voices through seasoned oak. That is victory enough. In the months that follow, he refines the tactic into what soldiers will later call the Tabor system, a mobile fortress of wagons linked like boxcars, capable of marching, pivoting, and locking into place in minutes. Blindness sharpens his reliance on geometry. Formations hinge on right angles and wheel tracks he can pace by stride. At Kutna Hora, he breaks a heavier imperial army by feigning retreat, then circling the wagons mid-snowstorm to fire into cavalry hemmed by drifts. At Pribislav, he positions carts on a knoll, threshing enemy infantry in rows as neat as harvest. Each time, Crusader knights complain they were beaten by farmers wielding flails. Each time, they come back and test the equation again. The variables never change in their favor. Zhizka moves camp constantly, trusting no wall but the one he can build overnight. Inside the wagons he forgives neither drunkenness nor looting. Discipline rests on stakes as sharp as those facing the enemy. Yet he allows women to fight if they choose, welcomes serfs fleeing baronial estates, and pays out of captured treasure according to need rather than lineage. In taverns across Europe, mercenaries mutter that the blind Bohemian has invented an army where scripture and gunpowder share the same tent. Late 1424, illness clamps his lungs during the siege of Pribislav. Fever dims even the inner maps he keeps behind sightless eyes. He meets commanders from his bedroll, voice rasping like a whetstone on steel, reminding them which wagon goes where if camp is surprised at night. On the 8th day, he asks for communion, then for his warhammer, the small one. I do not need the big one anymore. When the cough finally stops, A hush settles over the whole valley, as if wagon wheels themselves have paused in respect. His last directive is as practical as his life. Flay the skin from his back and stretch it across a drum so he can still ride with the army, beating time at the front. Sources disagree whether the Hussites follow through. Some swear the Zhizhka drum thudded at Lipany years later. Others insist the story was pious exaggeration. Either way, the mere rumour is enough to make enemy scouts hesitate when they hear any distant rhythm echoing over a Bohemian hill. Generations pass, the wagons decay, guns improve, and European generals sketch new lines on new maps. Yet in the Czech language, to call someone Zhizkovan still hints at stubborn defiance and a willingness to rebuild the world out of farm carts if the old one no longer fits. In Prague, a bronze equestrian statue of Jan Žižka towers over Vitkov Hill, horse-rearing, war mace lifted sky-high. Tourists take selfies, notice the empty helmet visor, and red plaques about tactics that turned darkness into a compass. Few realize the statue stands on the very rise where a man who could not see spent one long July day showing Europe that vision and sight are rarely the same thing. Joan of Arc, Maiden of Orleans. Winter mud clings to wooden clogs in the village of Domremy, but 16-year-old Jeanne d'Arc hardly notices. She has just confessed to her startled parents that voices, first St. Michael, then Catherine and Margaret, have told her France will fall unless she rides to the Dauphin's side. Nothing in her past suggests cavalry command. She can barely stay astride the family plough horse, and her sword experience is the kitchen knife she uses to cut bread. Yet in 1429, every French town south of the Loire is whispering the same rumour: a peasant girl is coming to break the English siege. 3 months later she appears before the Dauphin at Chinon, hair bobbed short, wearing a plain red dress dusty from the road. Courtiers snicker until she walks straight past a decoy throne, kneels to the true heir hiding in the crowd, and repeats private prayers only he and God should know. The laughter dies like a candle in rain. Within a week, an armourer in Tours is hammering her white plate harness, lightweight enough for urgent movement, gleaming like an extra moon under torchlight. He adds a banner painted with lilies on a field of heaven because she insists France needs a flag people can follow when the smoke turns noon into eclipse. At Orléans, the English hold out in stone bastions dotted along the river. French commanders debate, calculate, and cautiously postpone. Joan listens, then rides to the nearest fort under cover of night. Arrows whistle. She plants her banner on the mound of fresh dirt where ramparts are unfinished, shouts that God has handed them the field, and starts hauling scaling ladders herself. Veterans, suddenly aware a teenage girl is showing more backbone than the payroll, surge forward. By dawn, the English have abandoned the outer bastions. A week later, the siege lifts completely, like frost melting off a spring meadow. Success breeds momentum. Joan pushes for a road north toward Reims so the Dauphin can receive the crown. At Patay, she urges cavalry to charge before English archers set their stakes, reversing the script that has haunted French knights since Agincourt. The decisive thrust comes from a farmer's son turned standard-bearer who forgot his noble etiquette but remembered how to aim a lance. It works. The road to Reims opens like a stage curtain. Joan's own ride to the coronation is a study in contrasts. Steel helmet hiding cropped hair, ceremonial sword kept sheathed because she never kills, eyes red, rimmed from sleepless nights in prayer. When the Dauphin finally becomes Charles VII inside Reims Cathedral, he bows to her during Mass. Chroniclers note that no commander, not even a king, calls her girl anymore. She is La Pucelle, the maiden. The English, however, do not vanish when a crown is placed. In spring 1430, Joan rides to relieve Compiègne. The sortie fails, men retreat through the gate, and the drawbridge slams too soon. Burgundian soldiers, allied with the English, swarm around her horse. She refuses to surrender until her squire pleads that it is no sin to live for another battle. Captivity follows, first in Beaulieu, then Rouen, each cell darker than the last. Her trial convenes under Bishop Pierre Cauchon, who hopes a tidy heresy verdict will prove cheaper than reinforcing a crumbling front. Transcripts show 69 questions in a single day. She parries theology like a swordsman redirects spear thrusts, sometimes with shy wit. If I am not in God's grace, may God place me there. Judges squirm because they hear the same conviction that once made whole columns march. Weeks drag on. She is denied clergy counsel, chained to her bed at night, threatened with torture she suspects they will not risk applying to a public icon whose bruises could start riots. Finally, they charge her with the easiest offence to prove, cross-dressing. By now, she has worn male clothing for over a year to deter assault and to ride without skirts tangling in stirrups. She refuses to take it off unless kept in a women's prison. They refuse. Stalemate, resolved with a vote and quill signatures that seal her fate. May 30, 1431, Market Square, Rouen. Dawn chill smells of wet straw and nervous horses. She is 19. Friars walk beside her cart, reciting psalms she finishes from memory. At the stake she asks for a cross. An English soldier fashions one from 2 sticks and places it in her hands, surprised by the steadiness of her grip. Another priest holds aloft the cathedral processional crucifix, so she can see it above the crowd. Ropes tighten at her waist, ankles, chest. The executioner lights the bundle of faggots. Smoke climbs first, white then black, swirling around her like wings. Witnesses hear her cry Jesus several times before flames smother the sound. When only charcoal and bone remain, the captain orders the ashes thrown into the Seine, so no relic might inspire pilgrimage. Yet the current carries whispers south anyway, to every hamlet still switching sides when armies approach. Within 25 years, the same church that condemned her declares her innocent. Nearly 5 centuries later, in 1920, she is canonized as a saint. Students rehearse her lines for school pageants. Generals study her unorthodox assaults, and suffragists sew her likeness into banners. In New Orleans, streetcars rattle past a golden equestrian statue shipped from France. Outside Notre Dame, tourists pause at a marble monument that simply says Jeanne d'Arc 1412, 1431, as if numbers alone can explain a voice that told an illiterate peasant to pick up the destiny of a nation and carry it, if only for 2 bright years, all the way to fire. Hans von Helmstadt and the castle that wouldn't surrender. Early spring of 1525 arrives wet and grey in Franconia. The river Tauber winds below vineyards still shorn from winter and on a rocky spur just outside the town of Muckmull squats a squat, square keep that locals simply call the Helmstadt Stone. Inside, Knight Hans von Helmstadt yawns at a breakfast trench of rye bread, goat cheese, and the distant drone of drums, because nothing starts the day like someone else's army unpacking siege engines in your orchard. Hans is 40-odd, built like the anvil he inherited, notorious for three things: the crooked scar that drags his right eyebrow into permanent skepticism, an obscene drinking ditty about Emperor Maximilian, and the fact that he once rode beside Götz von Berlichingen, the celebrated knight with the iron hand. That friendship alone makes him worth a little extra trouble for the Swabian League now encircling his walls. The League's banner flaps above a campground of pikes and canvas. Artillery officers in plumed caps pace off firing angles, comparing barrel length the way modern commuters compare data plans. Muckmull's garrison numbers fewer than 80. Farmhands with crossbows, 2 half-broken culverins, and 1 family of geese that honk every time a ladder clatters near the curtain wall. Medieval motion alarm. Volume stuck on maximum. Day 1. The besiegers set rubble, filled wicker gabions before the gate, and roll forward a bombard so squat it looks like a beer barrel seeking work. First stone shot whistles overhead, punches a fist-sized hole through the outer tower, and redistributes dust across the entire courtyard like poorly timed confetti. Hans shrugs, wipes grit from his beard, and orders the castle smith to fetch pitch cauldrons to the battlements. When a squire frets that the wall won't survive a week, Hans replies, "My good man, it only needs to survive longer than their patience. After that, God and boredom will choose a winner." That evening, he drafts a letter to nearby supporters. Götz is off nursing fresh wounds from the Peasants' War, so Hans writes anyway, sealing the missive with a blob of wax stamped by the hilt of his dagger because the official seal went missing during yesterday's inventory, possibly bartered for wine. Messenger pigeons have already deserted for warmer rooftops. He straps the note to a stable boy's thigh, points toward the forest path, and mutters a blessing that contains more barnyard grammar than church Latin. Day 3. Rain lashes the camp so hard the besiegers match. Cords sputter. Hans orders barrels rolled to catch runoff, useful for drinking, dousing, or, if morale drops, personal bathing, a luxury forgotten since Advent. Inside the armory, he inspects the powder store, hears the slow hiss of damp saltpeter, and directs the cook to keep the hearth blazing all night to dry kegs. People who complain about smoke learn the quick way that ventilation is noble talk for stand somewhere else. Siege routine settles into a macabre timetable. Dawn bombardment, mid-morning arrow trade, afternoon shouting match across the ditch. One Swabian herald suggests surrender with promises of safe conduct. Hans responds by tossing back a loaf of stale bread. Compliments to your cook, he burns the wheat before the oven does. Negotiations stall. Day 6. The League's miners begin sapping beneath the southeast tower. Hans hears only faint knocks but smells the dirt loosened under his boots. He shifts reserve crossbowmen to that corner and paces the parapet, counting heartbeats between hammer strikes. By sunset, he knows the men below are nearly through. He gathers the garrison in the Great Hall, really a smoky rectangle of timber beams, but great is a state of mind, and explains the situation. Collapse is hours away, relief forces nowhere in sight. Anyone who wishes can slip over the postern in the dark. A handful of farmhands do, most stay, partly for loyalty, partly because half the besieging army now dozes around every likely exit. Near midnight the tower floor groans. A crack zips up the interior wall like lightning trapped in stone. Hans barks an order scarcely louder than the creak. He's timed this moment, and archers above dump casks of pitch and barrels of river water in quick succession. Steam billows, the mine chamber below floods, and torches fizzle to useless smoke. The tower still lists, but the detonation never comes. Hans grins and announces tomorrow's breakfast will be goose eggs, assuming the geese relent. But explosives can be patient. Day 9 dawns clear. Sunlight reveals new trench works writhing toward the gate like vines carved from mud. The besiegers drag up a fresh battery of serpentine guns, meaner than the first. Hans does the math. Wall thickness minus impact multiplied by no relief equals inevitable breach. He returns to the powder room and orders every keg hauled to the keep's second level. The smith protests. "Captain, that's half the castle's heartbeat." Hans pats a keg. "Then let it beat once more, very loudly." Day 10. Breach. Stone hurled at point. Blank tiers open the outer wall. Swabian pikemen charge through dust clouds, shouting oaths now censored in children's plays. Castle defenders fall back to the inner keep, in truth little more than a square tower containing staircase, chapel nook, and the powder stash Hans just moved. Fighting at the doorway reduces to elbow work, knife, buckler, whatever length of iron fits between helmets. Swabians wedge shields in the portal. Defenders shove back with furniture broken into spears. A horn blast from the besiegers signals fresh troops climbing rubble on the far side, too many angles to guard. Hans pulls his lieutenant close, whispers instructions, then strides to the chapel nook where votive candles tremble in draught. He kneels not to pray, time's run out for bargaining, but to light a taper. Footsteps clatter up the stair. Swabian sergeants bark for surrender. Hans touches the taper to a powder fuse snaking through the doorframe, stands, wipes soot across the eyebrow scar, and mutters one last obscene verse about Emperor Maximilian. Habit dies harder than knights. Witnesses outside later swear the keep lifted a full man's height before disintegrating. Stones rained half the morning. Shards of stained glass embedded in oak stumps glittered for weeks. When the smoke cleared, nothing taller than a waste remained of Merkmühl's proud square tower. The Swabian League entered the courtyard cautiously, expecting ambush, finding only scorched beams and a silence so thick it muffled even the geese. They never recovered a body intact enough to parade. Chronicles record the fall laconically. Helmstadt, refusing all terms, was consumed by fire of his own making. Peasants in valleys south of the Tauber improved the line. He would not bend the knee. So he bent the sky. Children turned rubble into sling stones that glittered with fused gunpowder, calling them Hans' tears, and insisting each one carried the curse of exploding courage. A decade later, when travellers crossed the rebuilt bridge below Muckmühl, they saw a shrine of stacked fieldstones sprouting in a corner of the old courtyard. No inscription, just a single iron gauntlet laid atop, fingers curled, knuckles scorched. Impossible to tell if it ever belonged to Hans von Helmstadt, or if someone simply forged a memory in steel because it felt truer than anything parchment could claim. Yamamoto Kansuke at Kawanakajima. Dawn, 10 September 1561. Low mist clings to the floodplain of Kawanakajima, a wedge of farmland where the Chikuma River bends like a crooked elbow between two mountain spurs. Rice still hangs heavy on the stalks. Harvest is only weeks away, but the paddies are trampled flat by 20,000 sandals. On the south bank stands the crimson and black banner of Takeda Shingen. On the north, the fluttering white on navy mon of Uesugi Kenshin. Their rivalry is already the stuff of steakhouse ballads. Shingen, the mountain, all patience and entrenched strength. Kenshin, the dragon, all motion and aggressive bursts. Caught between them lies Yamamoto Kansuke, Shingen's chief strategist, a man who looks nothing like a heroic portrait and everything like the accountant you forget to invite to after-work drinks. Kansuke is short, thin, partly blind in one eye, and walks with a limp from a spear wound earned back when streamlining logistics meant carrying your own flour. He compensates with a mind sharp enough to slice reed paper in mid-air. His gift is pattern spotting, river fords, morale dips, the precise minute a reserve unit can march out of sight behind a hill and reappear where it shouldn't. Last night, while younger officers compared helmet crests and traded gossip about Kyoto brothels, Kansuke sketched a masterstroke in the dust with the tip of his scabbard. He called it the Woodpecker Plan. Phase 1. Send Takeda's main body, 12,000 men, under General Kosaka Masanobu up Mount Saijo, a looming ridge behind Kenshin's camp. They will swing down at dawn like a hammer onto the Uesugi rear. Phase 2. Kansuke stays in the low ground with 4,000 spearmen, the anvil, ready to pin the enemy in place. When hammer meets anvil, the dragon of Echigo will be crushed, and everyone goes home in time for the moon viewing festival. Shingen nods. The plan feels inevitable, elegant, the kind of geometry the gods appreciate. Except the gods hit reply, all, and CC'd Kenshin overnight. At first, light Kansuke scans the opposite bank and freezes. Uesugi units are already descending Saiho, banners snapping exactly where Kosaka's men should be. Somehow, Kenshin anticipated the flanking march and countermarched in the dark, leaving only campfires and straw dummies on the ridge. The Woodpecker Plan has flipped. The hammer is now aimed at Kansuke's skull, and the anvil is nowhere in sight. He could signal a retreat. Instead, he breathes once, slow, feeling damp air fill lungs that never quite healed right from last winter's cough. Then he issues orders at machine gun speed. Left wing forward 30 paces, right wing wheel to refuse the flank, arquebusiers load twice before first volley, and rides to the front, where 20-year-old Ashigaru Gork at an advisor in brocade, climbing the berm like a cranky uncle who lost his reading glasses. Uesugi cavalry hits moments later, hooves drumming the earth hard enough to rattle arrowheads in their quivers. Spears ground, pikes brace, arquebuses crack, once, twice, white smoke coughing out to meet morning fog. Kansuke counts heartbeats, hears metal on lacquer, smells saltpeter and horse sweat braided in the breeze. The Takeda line bends, but doesn't break. Still, every minute the gap between hammer and anvil, now hammer and empty air, widens. Kosaka's signal banners finally appear on the far hill, but they're tiny, distant, like someone showing up late to a group chat after the meme has expired. Kansuke does the math. By the time they descend, his front ranks will be shredded. He swings down, hobbles to the nearest banner officer, and gives the command no one expects: advance. Not hold, not reform, advance. They are going to meet Kenshin's charge head-on, desperately buying minutes for the realignment behind them. The front line surges. Imagine shoving a bamboo screen into a typhoon. Spears splinter, men vanish under hooves, banners topple. Kansuke's horse is slain under him. He crawls free, blind eye streaming tears from wind and grit. He drags himself to a fallen Yari, plants the butt in mud, and hauls upright, shouting the unit creeds. Takeda men chant clan versus the way modern football fans holler fight songs. A stray arrow pierces his left shoulder. He snaps the shaft, leaves the head inside, no time for vanity surgery. Somewhere ahead, in a swirl of dust, Kenshin himself spears toward Shingen's position. The famous moment when dragon meets mountain, swords clash, legends are born. Kansuke cannot see it. He only hears the thunder of retinues colliding, steel on steel, lacquer plates cracking like firewood. He knows his own plan has failed. The only variable left is sacrifice. He signals his reserve, barely 200 men, to prepare for a last push, the living equivalent of slamming a door shut with your fingers still in the hinge. They charge. Kansuke limps in the rear, half supported by a bannerman who keeps begging him to fall back. "When I fall, I'll fall," he growls, but forward. They punch a hole just wide enough, just long enough, for Kusaka's uphill force finally to sweep in from the flank. The battle flips again. Now, Uesugi archers must spin, cavalry must wheel. The tidy killing field becomes a messy dog park brawl. Kansuke reaches the rise called Hachimanyama, bleeding from shoulder and thigh. Below, the lines dissolve into pockets of duels and banner grabs. No one can say who is winning, only who is still upright. He knows his body is done, spirit burnt through like a candle stub. Legend claims he turns to his page and dictates a final poem, something about cherry blossoms dying at their peak, then sinks to his knees, sword across lap, and lets the poem finish what arrows started. Other accounts say he staggered back into the melee and was never seen alive again. Either way, by midday, Yamamoto Kansuke is a name carried by couriers rather than a voice snapping orders. The battle itself ends inconclusively. Both armies withdraw claiming honor, neither able to farm the plain stacked with their own dead. Historians later call it a tactical draw but a strategic victory for Uesugi, or for Takeda, or for whichever side the historian's ancestor preferred over tea. What nobody disputes is that a limping, half-blind strategist charged into the worst of it to buy the minutes his misread plan had squandered, and that the Takeda army survived because the man who loved geometry trusted blood to erase the error. On spring evenings, the local farmers swear the fog over Kawanakajima sometimes twists into the shape of a small bent figure pacing riverbanks, sketching phantom battle lines with a bamboo staff. Stray dogs bark at nothing, crickets fall silent. Then the shape fades with the mist, still fine, tuning a plan that wants, just once, to end perfectly on paper. William Wallace, Guardian of Scotland. Cold rain needles the rolling hills of Lanarkshire in early May 1297, but William Wallace keeps moving. He is over 6 feet tall, a walking contradiction of monkish education and border raider instincts. And right now, every stride is powered by simple arithmetic. English garrison plus new taxes equals no tolerance left. A few weeks earlier, he killed the local sheriff who tried to parade Wallace's wife as an example. The price on his head could fund a small cathedral. Word spreads faster than the weather. By midsummer, Wallace has a band of outlaws camping in the greenwood north of the River Forth. They number barely 300, yet each carries a personal list of grievances that makes recruitment interviews unnecessary. Chiefs from the Highlands send grain, priests pass along coded blessings, and English patrols wonder why the trees hiss at night. When Wallace raids a baggage train outside Perth, he returns every captured bag of salt to nearby villages. The gesture is half logistics, half public relations. Bread flavoured with free salt tastes a lot like independence. Meanwhile, in the stone corridors of Stirling Castle, the English treasurer counts barrels of arrows and decides he would rather end this local nuisance before the harvest. Orders go out to Sir Hugh de Cressingham and Sir William de Warenne to bring knights, Welsh longbowmen, and a brand new trestle bridge that can cross any Scottish burn. They march north confident in horsepower, pay slips, and parchment authority. September arrives, crisp, with clouds that look like dirty wool drifting over the Forth. Wallace and his co-commander, Andrew Moray, study the landscape from the Abbey Craig. Below them, the river loops like a loosely tied knot. At its narrowest point stands the wooden Stirling Bridge, 2 lanes wide, flanked by mudflats that turn boot-deep at high tide. The English camp south of the river. Wallace waits on the north bank, hiding pikemen in alder scrub so thick a squirrel would need directions. Dawn of the 11th. English foot soldiers begin crossing in orderly pairs, shields up, spears forward. The bridge creaks ominously, but discipline keeps the line moving. Wallace watches until roughly half the English infantry, plus a section of cavalry, have committed to the far side. Then he lifts his sword, wider than most men's shoulders, and gives a single word, now. Scottish pikemen explode from the brush, 18-foot shafts angled like an iron forest suddenly uprooted. English vanguard tries to form ranks on the narrow spit, only to find mud tugging at greaves. Cavalry charges, but the pikes kneel, spear points bristling at horse chest height. If a destrier hesitates, the rider tips. If it surges, both are impaled. The rear English ranks attempt to retreat, but new troops are still pushing forward onto the bridge, so the formation concertinas into chaos. On the south, Bank de Warenne shouts for archers, but they cannot shoot through their own men clogging the bridge. De Cressingham gallops ahead to restore order, bright in treasury purple surcoat, and becomes a painted target. Legend claims Wallace's men flayed the treasurer after the battle and used his skin to bind sword hilts, a grisly footnote historians debate, but children retell with relish beside winter hearths. Within 30 minutes the fight is tidal. English troops on the northern shore break and try to swim back, weighed by mail that pulls them under like guilt. Those still on the bridge are trampled or toppled into the current. When the structure collapses under combined weight, the last pocket of resistance sinks with it, a timber coffin that groans once before vanishing. Wallace walks the battlefield afterward, mud splashing up to his knees. He orders any usable weapons gathered, wounded prisoners tended, and Cressingham's accounting ledgers burned unread. Moray, gravely hurt in the melee, is carried on a litter to a convent and will die weeks later. Wallace's grief is short but fierce. With Moray gone, he becomes sole guardian of Scotland, a title that sounds noble but mostly involves begging clan chiefs to cooperate without stabbing each other first. The campaign that follows is audacious. Wallace raids into Northumberland, lighting beacon fires on English soil visible from Durham Cathedral. He writes letters to Lubeck and Hamburg inviting trade through free Scottish ports. Merchants, ever pragmatic, consider the offer seriously. In Edinburgh, poets start composing verses that rhyme Wallace with palace, Latin for guardian, and schoolboys practice swinging sticks two-handed. King Edward I, campaigning in France, rushes back across the Channel with a professional army 3 times larger than anything Wallace can muster. Strategy dictates Wallace avoid pitched battle, but chivalric taunts, logistical strain, and a summer of plundering tempt him into facing Edward at Falkirk. There the longbow, disciplined heavy cavalry, and a flanking charge by Welsh infantry carve up Wallace's Skiltron formations like cheese wheels under a cleaver. The Guardian escapes with a handful of men. He resigns the guardianship soon after, understanding that leadership sometimes means stepping out of the way before respect turns rancid. For 7 years, Wallace lives as a shadow, slipping across moors couriers cannot map. In 1305, he rides south to negotiate support from disaffected English barons and is betrayed near Glasgow. Dragged in irons to London, he stands before a tribunal that accuses him of treason to a king he never swore allegiance to. His reply is blunt: "I could not be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject." The judges cite law, Wallace cites freedom. The verdict is foregone. Execution day, 23 August, is muggy, the kind of afternoon where flies stick to linen. Wallace is hanged, drawn, and quartered at Smithfield. His head is boiled, tarred, and spiked above London Bridge. Limbs travel to Newcastle, Berwick, Perth, and Stirling as cautionary decor. English officials record expenses for the process down to the last yard of horsehair rope. Scottish chroniclers barely mention the method, focusing instead on the final words whispered to a priest, a prayer for steadfast hearts. In practical terms, Scotland remains contested for decades, yet the ripples from Stirling never subside. Each time English garrisons rebuild the bridge, locals carve WW into the underside of a beam so future carpenters will remember where timber once cracked. 4 centuries later, when engineers lay the foundation for a modern stone span, workers find one of those initials burnt into a charred oak post. No one agrees whether it is authentic. The stoneworks crew votes to leave it undisturbed, a compromise between archaeology and superstition. Every August, bagpipers gather on Abbey Craig beneath the National Wallace Monument, limestone turrets reaching into Scotch mist, and play a slow march that rides the wind south. On clear days, the echo travels all the way to the Forth, lingering just long enough to remind anyone crossing the water that a wooden bridge once stood here, and that a single calculated moment can swing the history of kingdoms like a sword finding its mark. Casimir Pulaski, the cavalry spirit of 2 worlds. Dawn in coastal Georgia usually smells of salt and magnolia, yet on 9 October 1779, it carries the sharper odours of black powder, trampled reeds, and damp wool uniforms. On a small rise outside British-held Savannah, a Polish noble in continental blue studies the enemy parapets through drizzle. He is Count Casimir Pulaski, 34, scarred from a dozen European engagements, and, as one American private will later note in a letter home, riding a charger that seems to think it is half dragon. An unlikely path to Philadelphia. Pulaski's story starts in 1745 on a family estate near Warsaw, surrounded by hunting hounds and political gossip. At 20, he helps found the Bar Confederation, an armed movement determined to shake off Russian influence in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. For 3 fierce years, his small cavalry bands harry Russian supply trains, dodge royal warrants, and once hole up in the Jasna-Gora monastery, firing muskets from the bell tower between Latin hymns. Eventually, Russian artillery speaks louder. The rebellion collapses. Pulaski is accused dubiously of plotting to kidnap the Polish king. Exile becomes safer than legal appeal. Paris cafes in 1776 are thick with revolutionary pamphlets and tobacco haze. Benjamin Franklin spots the tall Polish officer holding court at a corner table, listens to an account of sabre charges against Cossack lancers, and decides the American cause could use exactly that brand of chaos. Franklin writes a letter to General Washington that basically says, "This man understands cavalry, the way fish understand water. Please find him a saddle." The Continental Baptism. Pulaski lands in Philadelphia in the summer heat of 1777, coat threadbare, pockets emptier than a promise from Parliament. 2 weeks later, he is on his way to the Brandywine, where Washington's lines are about to be flanked by British regulars. From a ridge, Pulaski reads the dust clouds correctly, gallops to warn headquarters, then turns and leads a hasty mounted charge that blunts the redcoat advance long enough for the army to withdraw intact. Congress rewards him with a brigadier's star and, more importantly, permission to build an independent corps after the manner of Polish cavalry. Training camp in Maryland becomes equal parts riding school and cultural exchange. Recruits learn to swing the long, curved sabler, fire pistols from the saddle, and dismount into infantry squares without spraining anything vital. Pulaski, whose English is still mostly nouns, barks instructions in French and Polish while demonstrating with exuberant sword flourishes that leave spectators cheering and cooks shaking their ladles. When forage runs short, he sells a pair of silver spurs to feed his horses, then tells the quartermaster, "A commander eats after his mount or he walks." Raids, rumours, and reputation. Winter 1778 finds the Pulaski Legion raiding loyalist posts in New Jersey, darting through pine barrens, so quickly locals dub them the ghosts with mustaches. His sabre etiquette and courtly bow charm Quaker farm wives. Though a few militia officers bristle at a foreigner lecturing them on horsemanship, Washington backs him, calculating that a little ego bruising is cheaper than losing the war. On quiet evenings, Pulaski shares campfire bread with enslaved scouts who guide his detachments along swamp trails. He promises them freedom papers signed with his own name, a risky pledge in that era. Several will indeed collect those signatures, a detail Pulaski never bothers to publicize. Siege of Savannah. By autumn 1779, France has committed troops and ships to the rebellion. A combined assault on Savannah looks like the quickest way to embarrass Britain in the south. Plans are drawn, drums rolled, and on 9 October columns advance before sunrise. Pulaski's cavalry is assigned to exploit any breach in the British earthworks. When initial infantry waves stall under grape shot, Pulaski argues a bold thrust might still turn the tide. He rides out front, white plume dripping rain, sabre lifted like a conductor's baton searching for music in cannon thunder. British gunners spot the forming charge and reload with canister, an iron rain designed for exactly this moment. Pulaski's horse rears as a blast rips the air, fragments tear through the saddle and into his hip. He stays upright long enough to wave the regiment forward, then slumps, still clutching reins. Legion troopers haul him onto a litter and carry him to an anchored hospital sloop in the river. Surgeons lacking anesthesia probe the wound by lantern light. Pulaski thanks them in French, slips into Polish, then into silence. He dies 2 days later, 15 October 1779. Bones and myths. Some eyewitnesses claim he was buried at sea with military honours. Others swear he rests under an oak at Greenwich Plantation. In 1,996 forensic teams examine remains from that gravesite. The skeleton's cavalry-shaped pelvis and healing sabre cuts match Pulaski's record, yet DNA is inconclusive. The mystery pleases local tour guides who prefer their legends open-ended. Congress, less poetic, passes a resolution in 2009 granting Pulaski honorary United States citizenship, one of only 8 individuals so recognized. Chicago and Buffalo close schools on Pulaski Day every March. A holiday outsiders assume celebrates a local pastry until someone explains the cavalry bit. Fort Pulaski near Savannah preserves the star-shaped walls that never saw him alive, though hikers on misty mornings report hearing hooves clatter briefly along the moat bridge before fading into the marsh. In his homeland, the phrase Pulaski courage still means charging problems head-on, preferably with friends who know which end of the lance goes forward. In the United States, he is remembered as the father of American cavalry, an adoptive title he earned in just over 2 years of relentless motion. Perhaps the true measure of his life is this: he never saw the Republic completed, yet, across 2 continents, people still debate whether he lies beneath river silt or coastal oak roots. Because somehow either possibility feels like a promise he kept. Micaela Bastidas, Heart of the Andean Rebellion. Night in Cusco, late December 1780. The sky is so clear you can count galaxies, yet the streets around the Archbishop's palace are thick with pounding boots. In a candle-lit room above the courtyard, Micaela Bastidas pauses over a map scratched on raw hide. Her finger traces supply roots the way a mother checks a feverish brow, quick, gentle, but decisive. Outside, her husband, José Gabriel Condorcanqui, whom the Spanish now brand Tupac Amaru II, tells rebel chiefs that imperial rule will crack like clay in a mountain freeze. Everyone nods, because when Micaela stands beside him, optimism feels compulsory. She was born in Pampamarca, of Quechua and African blood, raised amid alpaca caravans and church bells. When she married Condorcanqui, she took over his mule train business and turned it profitable enough to annoy local corregidors. Some spouses leave each other love notes. Micaela left balance sheets with margins so tight even Spanish accountants winced. That discipline now feeds an uprising. Grain barrels stamped with her seal, lances delivered on credit because she stares down merchants until discounts happen. Soldiers gossip that if you misplace a single musket ball, Micaela will know before breakfast and you'll spend lunch explaining fractions. In November, the rebellion seized tax offices from Tinta to Puno, scattering officials who suddenly remembered urgent appointments in Lima. Michaela stayed one step behind the skirmish line, organizing prisoners, rationing gunpowder, smuggling letters to distant pueblos. She writes in a looping cursive that masks steel. Brothers, send cloth for bandages and women to sew, then pencils a postscript reminding the reader to burn the note. Because loose parchment sinks revolutions faster than cavalry. When Andean couriers ask why she signs merely MB, she shrugs. Humility is lighter to carry over the passes. Now, on the cusp of marching back into Cusco, she argues for a night assault. Surprise, she says, rides on silence. Wait for dawn, and Spanish cannon will wake early. Some captains grumble. The stars are ill-omened, the men are cold, but Michaela fixes them with eyes that could freeze ash in a hearth. They fold faster than laundry, yet Tupac Amaru hesitates. He dreams of negotiating reforms after victory and worries that breaking into a colonial city by moonlight looks bad in royal correspondences. The delay costs them. Spanish commander Gabriel de Avilés rallies, shipping muskets up the Andes like panicked postcards. On January 10, the rebels assault anyway. Cusco's adobe lanes turn into mazes of bayonet angles and roof tile shrapnel. Michaela rides her grey mare through side alleys, cloak snapping in the thin air, shouting positions in Quechua so troops hear orders in the language they learned at cradle. Twice she gallops into musket fire to drag wounded boys behind a pottery stool. Once she sends her own mule, train guards to plug a breach while she reloads rifles for them, hands moving faster than fear. But the city holds. After 3 days, the rebels fall back to Tungasuka. Spanish reinforcements arrive with payroll chests jingling. The Empire has discovered that silver persuades as effectively as sermons. Betrayals follow. A captain opens a mountain pass in exchange for debt forgiveness. An informant maps Michaela's courier routes. On May 6, 1000, 781 government dragoons storm Surimana, capture Tupac Amaru, and ride hard for Cusco, prisoners lashed to pack mules like sacks of quinoa. Michaela could flee east toward the jungle frontier. Instead, she gallops after the column, hoping to break them free at a river ford. The ambush fails. She is seized near Pampamarca, wrists bound with rawhide that bites deeper each mile. Spanish officials schedule the execution for May 18 in the main square of Cusco Plaza Arms, lined with spectators who smell roasted maize and impending propaganda. Tupac Amaru is dragged to a scaffold. The crowd murmurs when he refuses confession. They turn next to Michaela. A priest pleads that she repent, perhaps settle for exile in Cadiz. She answers in firm Castilian, "Your king has no court wide enough to exile my voice." The magistrate blinks. He was not issued instructions for rhetoric. They try strangling her with a garrote tightened by 2 executioners. When her slender neck refuses to break, the hangmen wrap an extra leather thong, pull until a tendon snaps audibly. Witnesses swear the only sound she makes is a gasp that could be a prayer or a last inventory. She is 35. The Spanish display her body beside her husband's, then order limbs quartered and shipped to villages as deterrent. Instead, the parcels become relics. Women bury slivers of shawl fringe in cornfields, whispering that soil tilled over courage grows stubborn roots. Within months, the rebellion appears crushed. Yet in each Andean town, a singer rewrites the defeat into a ballad where Michaela returns as a condor, wings brushing the highest peaks. Colonial governors ban the songs, soldiers confiscate charangos, new verses sprout anyway, set to rhythms that hide in children's skipping games. Decades later, when independence flames catch in Buenos Aires and Quito, Peruvian patriots cite her letters as proof that empire's chains rust quickest at their smallest links. Modern Cusco traffic circles a bronze of Tupac Amaru, hips draped in a red sash, fist raised. The plaza benches face him, yet many visitors notice a subtler tribute. Street vendors slide change across palm-sized portraits of Micaela with lines from her last intercepted message. Nada detendrá el eco de nuestra libertad. Nothing will stop the echo of our freedom. On festival nights, the portrait holders tap those coins together, a soft metallic clink that sounds, if you listen closely, like mule bells climbing a mountain road in the dark, carrying gunpowder, cloth, and a ledger balanced perfectly on the saddle. Horatio Nelson, lone eye on the quarterdeck. The morning of 21 October 1805 begins with Atlantic swells that would make an ordinary sailor rethink breakfast, but Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson is already pacing the quarterdeck of HMS Victory. He wears his usual blue tailcoat heavy with medals, a hat sprouting enough gold lace to finance a small parish, and on his missing right arm sleeve a neat pin so the cloth doesn't flap like laundry. Over his left shoulder, the Spanish coastline is just a smear of ochre. Straight ahead, 33 French and Spanish ships form two disciplined lines that look, through a spyglass, like steel-tipped handwriting across the sea. Nelson's own fleet numbers 27. Conventional doctrine says he should mirror the enemy line and trade broadsides until one side blinks, but Nelson dislikes instructions that come with footnotes. He's mapped a different geometry overnight, pacing his cabin while the ship creaked like an old house. The plan is simple in wording, violent in practice. Cut the enemy formation into thirds, get so close that sails brush, then batter individual ships before their neighbours can help. He calls this breaking the line, though some first lieutenants quietly prefer the phrase threading a needle during a hurricane. At 10:45 a.m., Nelson signals the fleet with flags flapping in stiff wind. England expects that every man will do his duty. In 2025, this would be a motivational meme. In 1805, it produces a roar up and down the decks that drowns even the gulls. A midshipman asks if duty includes cleaning out the chicken pens after battle. The signal officer doesn't answer. Nelson stations himself on Victory's exposed poop deck instead of the armoured shelter recommended by every surgeon in Europe. He wants a clear view and, perhaps, one final moment of theatre. Powder smoke already drifts from the van where HMS Royal Sovereign shocks the Spanish flagship Santa Ana with a point-blank double broadside. Cannon crews stripped to shirts, sweat-turning powder residue into grey tattoos. The smell is salt, charcoal, and something like struck flint. Just after noon, Victory crashes through the enemy line, passing so close under the French Redoutable that gunners could toss oranges to one another. Nelson raises his good hand and shouts, "Fire as she bears." 98 guns answer together. The recoil shoves the hull sideways, water sloshing ankle, deep on gun deck planks. For 40 minutes, Victory exchanges broadsides at knife fight range. Splinters the size of kitchen knives whip through air. Sailors fall, stand up, fall again. Nelson paces between the great guns offering praise, calm as if reviewing theatre tickets. At 1:15 p.m., a French marksman, high in Redoutable's mizzen shrouds, spots the Admiral's yellow epaulets gleaming through smoke. The musket ball slams into Nelson's left shoulder, fractures 2 ribs, then lodges near the spine. He staggers, remarks quietly, "They have done for me at last," and is carried below to the orlop deck. The passage smells of rum-drenched bandages and hot metal. The deck surgeon takes one look and tucks his probe back into its case. Removing the ball would be like fishing pebbles from a waterfall. Nelson asks for news of the battle every few minutes, voice fading as blood soaks through the half-cloak Lady Hamilton embroidered. Above, the fight tilts decisively. HMS Temeraire rakes Redoutable stern to bow. The French ship strikes its colours. Santa Ana drifts, rudder shot away. By 3 o'clock, nearly half the Franco-Spanish line has surrendered or run aground, and not a single British vessel is lost. Captain Hardy descends to the orlop with the report. Nelson's one good eye brightens. He whispers that he must wait for the fleet's formal victory signal before closing his own logbook. Wind picks up, flapping torn canvas somewhere overhead like giant applause. Hardy returns at 4:30 p.m. to say the enemy has run and storm squalls are threatening the damaged hulks. Nelson grips his captain's hand, says, "Kiss me, Hardy," a request sailors will debate for centuries. Hardy bends, kisses cheek, then forehead. Nelson whispers once more, "Thank God I have done my duty," and exhales a last thin breath that smells faintly of brandy and sea air. He is 47, victorious and irreplaceably absent. Storm waves roll in after dusk, wrecking many captured ships before prize crews can tow them. Yet, the strategic result is unshakable. Napoleon's fleet is shattered. An invasion of Britain becomes logistical fantasy. London receives the news wrapped in mourning crepe and jubilation headlines, a contradiction it will revisit often. The Admiralty orders Nelson's body preserved in a cask of brandy for the voyage home. On quieter watches, the Marine sentry swears he sees tiny bubbles rise whenever cannon fire booms in the distance, as if the Admiral still reacts to battle. In January 1806, the state funeral fills St. Paul's with black-plumed dignitaries and seamen in patched jackets. The coffin, fashioned from the mainmast of the captured French flagship L'Orient, descends into the crypt while a boatswain's call shrills the same sidelong farewell given to officers transferring between decks. Later, tourists will rub the rail's brass smooth, reading the epitaph and wondering why it feels warmer than the marble around it. Trafalgar Square takes its name from the battle. Nelson's column rises 2 metres, roughly the height of 3 stacked mainmasts, topped by a stone likeness gazing south toward the sea lane he secured. Pigeons perch on his hat brim, indifferent to heroics. Schoolchildren circle the plinth-counting bronze relief panels that show the moment a musket ball rewrote British naval history. If you visit at night when buses have thinned and fountains hush, you might hear, under traffic's distant rumble, a single creak of cordage in the wind, as though a flagship still haunts the air, waiting for its commander to climb once more to the quarterdeck and pace the boards where duty and destiny first shook hands. Marcos Botsaris and the Night of Knives. High summer in central Greece usually hums with crickets and the slow grind of millstones. Yet on 21 August 1823, the valley near Karpenisi vibrates with something sharper. 3,000 Ottoman Albanian Bashi bazooks pitching tents, sharpening yatagans, and congratulating themselves on how easily Western Greece will fall once dawn breaks. Lanterns dot the hillside like stray embers. From higher ground, they look almost festive, the way city parks glow during a holiday fair. Watching from that higher ground, Markos Botsaris decides the enemy has set the table for its own funeral banquet. Botsaris stands a head shorter than most of his Suliote comrades, but nobody mistakes him for anything but command. He wears a white fustanella that flares like a bell when he walks, an ivory-handled pistol at the sash, and a scholar's fluency in both Homer and hit-and-run warfare. A French officer once described him as Achilles if Achilles paid his debts on time. Tonight he has brought barely 300 men, many are cousins, all are tough enough to chew musket flints for breakfast. They met at dusk in a chestnut grove to count cartridges and listen to Botsaris outline a plan so audacious it feels less like tactics and more like a dare to the fates. The Ottoman force below is led by Mustafa Pasha, marching to relieve besieged Missolonghi. If those reinforcements reach the coast, the fledgling Greek revolt could suffocate. Botsaris proposes to stop an army with a knife-point strike, slip into camp at midnight, panic the sentries, gut command tents, then melt back into the trees before anyone knows which way the sky is. His lieutenants do the mental math, 300 versus 3,000, and give the Greek equivalent of a shrug. Suliotes have fought worse odds. Besides, home villages lie only a ridge away, and surrender is an option they failed to pack. The night turns black as an ink spill. Clouds smother the moon, wind dies. Even the goats tethered on the upper slopes fall silent as if bribed. Suliotes strip to shirts, smear soot under eyes, wrap musket stocks in cloth so metal won't clink. Botsaris divides them into squads of 20, each with a guide who knows the camp's topography better than some of the men snoring inside it. Final instructions are whispered, not shouted. The only hurrah is a quick touch of palm to heart. They descend in single file through scrub oak, boots, testing each stone before weight commits. At the perimeter, a dozing sentry sits beside a guttering brazier, feathered helmet slumped. 2 flint blades flash, one to slice open the tent flap behind him, one to silence the throat before air can vibrate. The Suliotes spill through narrow lanes between tents, weaving among picket lines where horses stamp and swish their tails, sensing trouble the way barometers sense storms. Botsaris heads straight for the command marquee, a crimson pavilion tall enough to house a church bell. Inside, Mustafa Pasha's clerks are nodding over scrolls of troop manifests. The first knows nothing until a hand clamps his mouth and steel parts his nightshirt. The second manages a gasp, loud enough that a nearby guard pokes his head inside. Botsaris fires a single pistol shot. The blast echoes like a starting gun, and with it, the camp's fabric of calm unravels. All across the hillside, Suliotes ditch stealth for uproar. They fire muskets into tents, flip cooking pots, slice tether ropes so horses bolt in every direction. Some leap atop cannon limbers and shout orders in Albanian just to deepen the confusion. Half-awake Bashi bazooks grab weapons, only to find their own steeds barreling through guy ropes like furry battering rams. Lanterns overturn, Gunpowder sparks in the dirt. A storehouse of cartridges explodes with a boom bright enough to silhouette mountains 5 miles away. From a distance, the Ottoman camp resembles a festival gone feral, fireworks without choreography. Botzaris tries to reform his men near the centre path for withdrawal, but chaos obeys no whistle. Smoke rolls low, stinging eyes, enemy musket flashes strobe the darkness. He turns to shout a regroup signal and a bullet, some accounts say from a panicked Albanian, others insist a renegade Greek mercenary, slams into his temple. He drops where he stands, breath leaving with a grunt none of his men hear above the din. A lieutenant drags the body behind an upturned drum of millet. One glance at the ruin of skull and the man knows the commander's ledger has closed. Yet retreat can't wait for mourning rituals. The lieutenant rallies a knot of Suliotes, blows a sheepskin horn, and the raiding parties peel off toward the tree line in ragged clusters. Ottoman cavalry finally mounts enough horses to give chase, but the Suliotes vanish up goat trails where hooves slip like tourists on wet cobblestones. By dawn only smoke, trampled tents, and 100+ Ottoman dead remain as evidence the night was real. Mustafa Pasha orders a head count and discovers morale has bled away faster than casualties. An army rattled by ghosts is no army fit to relieve a siege. He turns south, abandoning the Missolonghi expedition, and eventually limps back toward Ioannina nursing suspicions and a permanent shortage of sleep. Botzaris' body reaches Missolonghi days later on a bier of cedar branches. Women weave laurel into the fustanella pleats. Priests chant until their voices crack. Men who think themselves hardened by years of mountain skirmishes find eyes itching for unexplained reasons. Dionysios Solomos, not yet the national poet, pens lines that will migrate into schoolbooks. He fell like a young eagle whose wings were made of flag and prayer. The corpse is entombed within the city walls, still under siege, but now fortified by memory as much as mortar. Strategically, the night raid sustains Greece an extra crucial year, buying time for foreign Philhellenes, British loans, and eventual intervention. Culturally, it finishes the work Homer started. Every child along the Aegean grows up knowing that a single bold gamble can paralyze a garrison 3 times, 10 its size. Tourists today visit Karpanisi for ski slopes and chestnut festivals, yet locals still point to the ridge and say if you climb at midnight and listen, really listen, you can hear the distant clatter of a camp knocked sideways by men who carried silence into battle and came back trailing legend. Alexander Matrosov and the snowbound machine gun nest. Late February 1943 and the forests west of Velikie Luki look like a charcoal sketch. Birch trunks, black river ice, a sky the colour of solder. Private Alexander Matrosov, 19, native of Ufa, jogs along a frozen drainage ditch behind the Twond Guards Rifle Battalion. His boots are one size too large, stuffed with straw. His rifle sling has been repaired twice with telephone wire. None of this worries him. He has a different problem. Every time his squad inches onto the open slope ahead, a German MG-42 chews the snow into fountains of dirty steam. The hamlet of Chernushki is little more than a few blockhouses anchoring a railway embankment, yet its position blocks the Red Army push toward Pskov. Division orders read like a plumbing diagram. Take the hill, split the line, pour south. Matrosov's platoon has tried twice. Both assaults ended with stretcher parties dragging men back through drifts that looked clean until they turned red. Somewhere behind him, a political officer recites phrases about proletarian duty. The wind steals half the syllables. Matrosov focuses instead on the sound of the gun, a metallic bark that saws through timber and nerves at 200 rounds a minute. Midday brings a lull. A few saplings still stand on the slope, stripped of bark by bullets. Lieutenant Jerebkov crawls up beside Matrosov and sketches a plan in the snow with a mittened finger. 2 squads will flank right, 1 will hook left. A 3-man team will rush straight at the bunker and lob grenades through the firing slit. Matrosov volunteers for the middle path before the officer asks. He is a Tatar orphan-turned-factory apprentice turned front-line soldier. If nothing else, life has taught him to meet problems head-on. The signal whistle shrills. Matrosov and 2 comrades sprint, knees punching through crusted layers, breath pluming sideways. The machine gun nest answers instantly. The comrade on the left pirouettes and drops without a sound. The one on the right makes it 10 more steps before a burst takes him in the hip. He screams, slide, tackles into a snowbank, and lies still. Matrosov feels shards of pine spray his cheek. He flops behind a stump no wider than a stovepipe, chest heaving. The firing slit is now 20 meters away. Grenades hang from a belt across his torso like iron fruit. He yanks one, bites the pin free, throws side-armed. The fuse sputters, bright in the grey daylight, but the grenade hits the bunker wall and rolls down the bank before exploding harmlessly. Second try. He lifts to one knee, takes careful aim, and is rewarded with a ricochet that vanishes into deep snow. The gun answers. Splinters pelt his collar. One round tunnels through the stump and nicks his left ear. Warm blood leaks down his neck and turns crisp in the wind. The nest keeps firing at flanking squads he cannot see. A dozen Soviet helmets lie motionless across the slope, half buried. Matrosov knows the battalion cannot move until this muzzle is silent. He also knows he has maybe 5 seconds of sprint time before the barrel swings onto him again. He pulls the last grenade, wedges it into the crook of his arm for quick reach, then stands. The world narrows to the rectangle of black steel ahead. He charges. Snow grabs at his ankles, breath rips from his lungs. 5 meters, 3. He sees the flash inside the slit. There is no cover left, no angle for a throw that will not fail. In that fraction of a second, he chooses a different geometry. He dives, twists sideways in midair, and slams his body across the embrasure like a living cork. The gun's next burst thuds into his ribcage and stops, barrel pressed against padded winter cloth. The grenade slips from his grip and falls outside, but it is no longer needed. Witnesses later say the echo of gunfire cut out the way a gramophone needle lifts from a record. For a heartbeat, there is only wind and the distant thump of artillery. Then the lieutenant whistles again. Squads rise and rush the bunker, bayonets ready. They find Matrosov sagging against the logs, eyes open but seeing nothing, chest a ruin of splintered stock and torn cloth. Inside, 2 German gunners lie stunned, scrambling for sidearms too late. The hill is taken within minutes. Word of the act crosses company lines before dusk, reaches divisional headquarters by midnight, and is in Pravda 3 days later. Editors coin the phrase "Shield of the Motherland" and attach it permanently to his name. By March, the Commissariat has printed leaflets with Matrosov's portrait, soft features under a pilotka cap, gaze level as a carpenter's rule. Mothers pin them over kitchen tables, recruits tuck them into paybooks. Commanders study the after-action reports and note that the bunker's location left no flanking blind spot, that saplings provided inadequate approach cover, that smoke shells were scarce. These are practical lessons. The myth that blooms around them is less practical and more durable. In dozens of later assaults, soldiers shout, "For Matrosov," as they rise from trenches, turning a surname into a bulletproof charm. The Red Army eventually credits more than 200 Matrosov-style sacrifices by war's end, though historians quietly debate how many jumped voluntarily and how many were caught by chance. Numbers never dent the legend. Legends feed on the single image that started them. After victory, his hometown renames streets. Factory girls sew banners. Schoolchildren recite a poem that ends with the line, "His heart," a barricade of beating iron. In 1948, sculptor Lev Kerbel unveils a bronze outside Komsomolskaya station, Matrosov frozen mid-leap, coat flaring like wings. Commuters hurry past on winter mornings, never noticing that pigeons roost on his shoulders, safe from wind in the lee of a hero who once turned his own ribs into a parapet. Train schedules change, governments too, but the statue remains. On certain February days when snow curls around the plinth and muffles the city noise, you can almost hear the distant bark of an MG-42, abruptly silenced, followed by the crack of boots crunching forward, the sound of space opening where none had existed a second before. Nikolai Kulikov and the one-shot decoy. Early November 1942, Stalingrad looks nothing like a city. The place is a riddle of shattered apartments and smokestacks that point at the sky like broken fingers. Sergeant Vasily Zaitsev and his new spotter, Nikolai Kulikov, pick their way through a maze of frozen rubble toward a blown-out factory nicknamed the Lazur Chemical Works. Germans hold the far side, Soviets cling to the near, and in between lies no man's land wide enough for exactly one man's fatal mistake. Kulikov, 21, grew up in a Siberian lumber camp where everyone learned to spot wolves before the wolves spotted them. He is lanky, dark-haired, quieter than Zaitsev's previous partner who bled out 2 nights ago. The two men crawl into a shell hole facing a pile of bricks that used to be a loading dock. Somewhere beyond that dock hides a German sniper credited with at least 40 Soviet kills in 3 days. Red Army rumor says the German is an instructor flown in from Berlin, maybe even the top shot in the Wehrmacht. Zaitsev's orders read like a bad joke. Find the ghost, kill him, survive. Morning frost glitters on twisted rails. The temperature sits well below zero and keeps dropping. Zaitsev and Kulikov watch the same jagged window frame for hours, breathing through scarves so vapor will not betray them. Time stretches until seconds feel like thick syrup. Once, a stray dog trots across the open ground, sniffing for bread crusts, and both men instinctively hold fire. They are here for one specific trigger pull, nothing else. At noon, a glint flashes from the far rubble, just a blink, gone before a heartbeat. Kulikov taps Zaitsev's boot sole twice, confirmation code for enemy optics. Zaitsev nods. The two crawl backward, slow as moss, to a bombed tramcar lying on its side. Inside, They prop a steel helmet on a broom handle and raise it above a shattered window. 5 minutes, 10, nothing. Kulikov cracks a grin and whispers that patience is also a bullet. A minute later, the helmet jerks as if slapped by an angry hand. A rifle crack follows a half-second after. Zaitsev traces the shot angle, maps it against the geometry of broken walls, and lands on a single rat hole beneath the brick pile. He points. Kulikov squints through the PU scope and sees only shadow. Zaitsev scratches 2 lines in the dust, then draws a small cross at the intersection. That mark is where the German's scope must be, he says. The next task: make the man move just enough to expose a sliver of cloth or skin. Kulikov volunteers for the bait job. He tucks his rifle sling under a tire rim, steadies himself, then raises a plank of sheet metal like a makeshift shield. With the other hand, he slowly hoists the helmet again, this time a bit higher. The German shoots and dents the metal with a puck-shaped scar, proving he can punch through most Soviet helmets at this range. Kulikov lowers the shield, shifts to the left, and readies the real trick. He whispers, "Count to 3 and watch the hole." Zaitsev exhales, lets his heartbeat settle, and counts. At 2, Kulikov bolts upright, full silhouette, rifle in both hands like a parade salute. The German reacts faster than most men blink. A single shot rings out. Kulikov tumbles forward, boots scraping rust. The sniper in the rat hole adjusts a fraction, certain of the kill, and that fraction is his undoing. Zaitsev has been staring at the dark patch through a hair-thin gap in the tramcar wall. The German scope lens winks as he shifts. Zaitsev fires. The 7.6 2mm round crosses 82 meters, kisses the edge of a brick, and slices straight through the scope into the shooter's eye. Silence drops like a curtain. Zaitsev slides from hiding and sprint crawls to Kulikov. The younger sniper is sprawled on his side, coat blossoming red at the left collarbone. The German's bullet smashed ribs and clipped an artery. Zaitsev presses gauze ripped from a field dressing, but within seconds the white turns burgundy and Kulikov's breath rattles. He manages one sentence, half apology, half joke. At least the helmet worked. Then his eyes empty, as if winter wind blew the pupils away. Zaitsev drags the body back behind a shattered boiler, replaces the helmet on Kulikov's head, and sits for a moment. There is no time for prayers, only inventory. One less friend. One less German ace. Odds still long, but slightly less impossible. He shoulders both rifles and slips through alleys toward command post to report. Later that evening, Soviet loudspeakers broadcast a new tally of enemy experts eliminated. The name Kulikov is not printed in Pravda until weeks later, squeezed between factory production quotas and weather forecasts. Zaitsev, when asked about the duel in memoirs, writes only that a comrade stood up so the motherland could move forward. The understatement hides an image that keeps veterans awake on cold nights. A single silhouette rising on a frozen battlefield, daring a ghost in the rubble to blink first. Jack Cornwell and the gun that kept firing. North Sea Dawn, 31 May 1916. HMS Chester ploughs through grey swells that smell of coal, smoke and salt, mixed like cheap soup. 17 cruisers of the Royal Navy's 3rd Battle Cruiser Squadron form a loose arrowhead ahead of the main fleet. Somewhere over the horizon, The German High Seas Fleet is doing the same math in reverse. On Chester's forward deck, ordinary seaman John Jack Travers Cornwell, age 16 and fresh out of boyhood, buttons his greatcoat against a wind that could sandpaper brass. He is the sight setter for No. 1 port-side 4-inch gun. In civilian life, that translates to teenager in charge of making sure the barrel points exactly where it hurts the enemy most. Jack earned the job by answering a single question during gunnery drill. The chief asked, "How fast does this training motor slew the mount?" Jack said, "Fast enough if the layer keeps his nerve." That answer made seasoned stokers grin, and it handed him a position most lads only dream of while peeling potatoes. He wears his mother's St. Christopher medal under his jersey and a grin that belongs on a football pitch. The naval roster still lists him as boy honest class, but war has a way of accelerating promotions. Early afternoon, a lookout shouts contact off the starboard bow. Spray lifts in curtains as Chester swings to engage what first appears to be a pair of destroyers, then materializes into 4 German cruisers sliding through mist like wolves. Captain Lawson orders full ahead to close the gap. Guns ripple awake along the deck, each blast punching dust out of tarps and ringing Jack's eardrums like cathedral bells. He spins the sight dial, calls corrections, watches the rangefinder numbers tumble. All very textbook until an enemy shell the size of a motorcycle engine punches low into Chester's hull. The hit tears through the mess deck, scatters crockery, and starts a fire in the rope store. Jack's gun crew staggers, but keeps loading. 30 seconds later, a second shell screams in, detonating just aft of the bridge. Shrapnel scythes the gun mount. The layer crumples, lungs gone. The trainer loses both legs below the knee. Jack feels something slam his chest like a prizefighter's hook. For a moment, he thinks someone shoved him. Then he sees blood spreading across his tunic and realizes the shove came from hot steel. Smoke rolls over the deck thick as spilled ink. Flames lick the paint off bulkheads. The remaining loader fumbles the next round, drops it, and dives for cover. Jack stays at the site. His vision blurs, then sharpens with each heartbeat. He wipes grime from the eyepiece, adjusts elevation, shouts bearing to men who can no longer hear. Another blast cracks overhead, peeling back metal like sardine tin. A splinter slices Jack's left thigh, but the leg keeps bracing the gun shield as if pain is somebody else's shift. Minutes drag into an hour, measured only by recoil. Finally, Chester maneuvers out of the worst of it to link with Grand Fleet dreadnoughts looming like iron islands. Firing ceases. Wind snatches away smoke to reveal deck plates littered with shell fragments and bodies covered in canvas. A stretcher party finds Jack still at his post, hands on the training wheel, eyes glossy but focused on a horizon now empty of targets. The first mate asks why he has not gone below for treatment. Jack replies, quiet enough to match the sea, "I thought orders might come, sir." Medics carry him to sick bay, where a surgeon counts 3 shrapnel wounds in chest and abdomen, 1 in thigh, and powder burns on his face that smell of cordite. The fleet surgeon aboard HMS Coronia later notes how Jack apologized for bleeding on the canvas table. Operation is impossible in a rolling sea without modern equipment. Morphine dulls pain, but cannot mend torn lung tissue. Shortly after dawn on 2 June, Jack Cornwell slips away, one hand still closed as if gripping the sight dial. He never turned 17. Back in London, the Admiralty, at first busy drafting casualty lists, almost misses the story. Captain Lawson's after-action report includes a single paragraph praising the boy Cornwell, who stood to his gun until death, setting an example of devotion to duty unsurpassed. Newspapers pick it up. Headlines shout, "Baby of Jutland hero to the last." Public donations arrive for the family faster than the postmaster can sort them. On 29 July, Jack receives burial with full naval honours in Manor Park Cemetery. Thousands line the streets, caps doffed, many holding makeshift flags stitched from ration cloth. His mother Louisa walks behind the gun carriage, medal in hand, face steady as weathered oak. King George approves the Victoria Cross 10 days later. The citation reads, "No higher expression of duty could be cited. School children recite it at assemblies until the words imprint like chalk scars on slate." Chester's #1 port gun is later mounted outside the Imperial War Museum. Visitors lean over the breech, imagine the thunder, and notice a small brass plate inscribed simply JC. Teachers explain that Jack's body initially lay in an unmarked grave until the nation realized what it held. Teenagers who think history is dusty paws a moment longer than necessary. Every May, on the anniversary of Jutland, Royal Navy ships pipe are still on deck. A boatswain's call rings out, short and piercing, followed by silence that feels expectant, as if any second a thin voice will call down from a forward gun mount, requesting the new bearing. No order comes, only gulls wheeling overhead, but the sight setters on watch that night adjust their dials anyway, because some habits, once taught by a boy who refused to leave his post, stick to steel as firmly as rust and last twice as long. Zoya Kosmodemianskaya and the Frostbound Noose. Night in November 1941 wraps the village of Petroshevo in ice glitter and suspicion. German infantry billets crowd the wooden cottages. Horses steam in makeshift stables that once belonged to peasants, now hiding in forest huts. 29 kilometers to the east, the road runs straight toward Moscow like an arrow guiding invaders. In that same forest, a 19-year-old Komsomol volunteer named Zoya Kosmodemianskaya leads a 3-person sabotage team, each carrying 2 Molotov cocktails, a single grenade, and a pocket full of matches protected by wax. Zoya was a student in Moscow when the war overturned her lesson plan. She joined the partisan school after hearing Molotov speak in Red Square. The instructors taught demolition theory, map reading, and how to blend with shadows, but they could not teach her talent for stubborn defiance. Tonight, she intends to set fire to German lodging barns and chase sleep from every helmet in Petroshevo. If troops spend the night stamping out flames, they march slower tomorrow. That is the arithmetic of partisan warfare. The trio creeps across a frozen field where snow crunches loud enough to feel treasonous. At the first barn, Zoya wedges a bottle in the hay, lights the rag, counts to 3, and slips behind the wall. Flames climb rafters the way gossip climbs village fences. Within minutes, chickens cackle, horses kick boards, and a sentry dashes into the yard waving his rifle like a broom. Zoya's team torches a shed and a wagon of fodder before melting back toward the tree line. Then the cold betrays them. The youngest member, Vasily, cracks a crusted puddle underfoot. A flare arcs overhead, painting the snow electric blue. Bullets snap through birch saplings. Zoya signals split. She veers right, hoping to draw pursuit. Boots pound behind her, heavy and regular. She loses her hat to a low branch, her scarf to a snagged nail, but she keeps the last grenade. A kilometre later, she stumbles into a garden plot fenced with sticks. 2 Germans circle, Mauser bolts clicking. She pulls the pin, means to throw, but the soldier closest lunges and grips her wrist. The grenade falls harmlessly into a cabbage stump and buries itself in snow. They drag her back by the collar, coat buttons popping, and deliver her to the battalion commander quartered in the schoolhouse. Interrogation begins instantly. They want names, unit numbers, directions to partisan camps. She responds with silence broken only by her breath fogging the lamplight. A lieutenant slaps her hard enough to split her lip. She smiles a red grin. They bind her wrists with telegraph wire, shove her into a tool shed, and resume questioning every 2 hours. By dawn wire has bitten to the bone, her boots are gone, and her feet have turned the colour of candle wax. She offers nothing but the occasional remark in formal German. One guard later testifies she addressed them as Herr Officer each time she refused to answer. On the second day, the commander decides an example will serve better than further questions. They march her barefoot to the centre of Petroshevo, where village women stand frozen in more ways than one, shawls pulled high. A Pole already waits, rope swinging above a crate. The officer reads a sentence declaring her an incendiary saboteur. Zoya straightens as if attending parade. Her last words carry across the silent street. Comrades, do not be afraid. The Germans may hang me, but they will never take Moscow. Fight on. A soldier kicks the crate. Rope snaps taut. She hangs motionless for a moment before a final shiver runs through the thin dress that replaced her uniform. Snowflakes settle on her hair. The Germans nail a board to the pole calling her a terrorist. They leave her there 2 days as a warning. On the 3rd night, villagers sneak out and cut her down. They wrap the body in a homespun blanket and bury her beneath a pine that still holds cones despite artillery vibration. Weeks later, Soviet scouts find the grave and carry the story back through winter lines. Pravda publishes her last speech. Photographs smuggled from the village reach Moscow, showing her unbroken stare even in death. The image ignites a city already bracing for street fighting. Factories adopt her name for production brigades. School children recite her speech before morning arithmetic, and snipers scratch Zoya on rifle stocks before heading to rooftops. After the war reporters locate the 2 surviving members of her team, Vasily confirms she volunteered to stay behind when they fled. He never forgets the sound of her voice saying, "If someone must be caught, let it be me. I run slower." In 1942, the Soviet government awards her the title Hero of the Soviet Union, first woman of the war to receive it posthumously. Today, a granite obelisk marks the spot near Petroshevo. Motorists on the modern highway miss it unless they stop for tea at the roadside kiosk where a brass plaque tells tourists this was once the edge of everything. Those who walk the short trail hear windcomb needles above the grave. In early winter, when frost again paints the fields silver, local schoolchildren leave paper matches folded into carnations. They burn nothing, they light nothing, yet the gesture feels exactly right for a girl who carried fire into an occupied night and left behind a flame that marching boots could not stamp out. Witold Pilecki, the man who broke into Auschwitz. Night over Warsaw, September 1940. German patrols rattle along Ujazdowski Avenue, while cafes serve ersatz coffee to customers pretending the war is somewhere else. Captain Witold Pilecki crosses the dark street in civilian coat and steps into a police roundup on purpose. He carries false papers and a single mission line memorized: infiltrate Auschwitz, learn the truth, get word out. No Allied planner asked for this. Pilecki volunteered after hearing rumours that the camp near Auschwitz is more than a detention centre. He figures someone has to walk through the gate. Why not the cavalry officer who once organised a charity bake sale by cavalry regulations? Soldiers shove prisoners onto a cattle car that reeks of manure and fear. Pilecki notes the carriage number, counts the slats between boards, stores everything in the mental filing cabinet that once held sabre drill diagrams. 2 days later, the doors slide open at a place marked by barbed wire and a smell like burnt hair. Prisoners learn the new rules set fast: striped uniform, shaved head, tattooed number 4859. Pilecki's rank becomes secret code, his weapon, observation. First job assignment, potato warehouse. Nights, he sketches layout lines in dust under his bunk, mapping guard routes. By December, he has linked small cells of Poles, Jews, and even a few German political inmates into a whisper network called ZOE. They steal medical supplies, copy camp records, and send micro-letters out via laundresses bribed with bread. One report reaches London in spring 1941 and lands on Churchill's desk. Statistics of death rival ammunition expenditure tables. The British Prime Minister reads twice, turns to aides, and says, "If this is true, we are fighting Satan himself." Inside the wire, Pilecki's network scans every transport list for escape candidates. Attempts cost lives, punishments run from flogging to public hanging that forces prisoners to file past the corpse before lunch. Pilecki keeps notes anyway, rolling them into toothpaste tubes and hiding them under latrine planks. He drafts a full plan for mutiny, seize the armory, disable power, open the gates while Polish Home Army strikes from outside. London likes the idea but shrugs at the logistics. The war has many fronts. Auschwitz is only one black dot on an overcrowded map. By spring 1943, Pilecki sees that waiting for outside approval equals suicide by spreadsheet. He schedules his own jailbreak with 2 trusted comrades. They secure civilian clothes, disable a door lock with a smuggled screwdriver, and slip past a drunken sentry who thinks the footsteps are rats. 20 hours of sprint, crawl, sprint through pine forests, and they reach a farmhouse where the owner almost shoots them on sight. Code words prove identity. Hot soup proves humanity endures. Back in Warsaw, Pilecki files the most detailed eyewitness dossier yet, including gas chamber diagrams and crematoria capacity per shift. Allies broadcast the data, but military planners remain fixed on the upcoming invasion of Sicily. Pilecki shrugs and signs up for the next impossible task: fight in the Warsaw Uprising of August 1944. He commands a sector, rescues civilians from burning tenements, survives artillery that turns avenues into canyons of bricks. When the city falls, he spends the rest of the war in a German POW camp, still scribbling reports. May 1945, Europe breathes. Poland does not. Soviet NKVD officers tour Warsaw streets with clipboards, deciding who fits the new order. Pilecki could slip away to Italy, yet he walks into communist Poland carrying a forged ID that says he is a merchant, then begins gathering proof of Soviet repression. Arrest comes in May 1947. Interrogators at Mokotów prison beat him for weeks. One breaks his nose with a chair leg. Another mockingly thanks him for saving Jews, then accuses him of spying for fascist, capitalist London. Pilecki later tells his wife during a smuggled note, Auschwitz was child's play compared with these interrogations. Court-martial, March 1948. Charges: espionage, illegal border crossing, possession of a foreign radio, plotting to assassinate officials. Sentence: death by pistol, shot to the back of the head. Execution takes place 25 May 1948 in the old prison laundry room. No record of burial site. Administrator's jot remains disposed in a margin. His wife Wanda and children Andrzej and Zofia search for years among anonymous graves near Warsaw crematories. The Polish state keeps the file sealed for decades. Only in 1990 does a new government void the verdict and promote him posthumously to colonel. In 2012, forensic archaeologists find bones under a parking lot at Lacka Field and identify them by a chipped molar noted in pre-war dental charts. Warsaw erects a statue outside the National Museum. Bronze figure in cavalry boots, holding a camp report folder like a sabre. School tours stop there. Guides explain that some spies enter enemy territory to destroy from within, but Pilecki entered hell to write it down and send the notes to people who had not yet believed in hell. Each April, on the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of the Holocaust, a Polish army bugler plays taps beside the monument. The last note hangs in the evening air a little longer than physics should allow, as if waiting for someone to file one more report. Havildar Abdul Hamid and the Patton Graveyard. The Plains of Kem Karan, September 1965. Sticky heat hangs above the sugarcane like a low ceiling, and the ground feels more like an anvil than farmland. Pakistan's armoured spearhead, stacked with brand new Patton tanks, rumbles north toward Amritsar. On a map, the operation is a straight line topped by a victory ribbon. On the actual dirt sits a company of the Indian Army's 4th Grenadiers, armed with Second World War era 106mm recoilless rifles. One of those guns belongs to Havildar Abdul Hamid, 32, rail-thin, quick-smiling, and famous in the battalion for hitting bullseye on a moving target after the sight fell off. Hamid's team has dug shallow pits at the edge of a flooded paddy that locals call Asal Uta, the real reply. The monsoon left stagnant pools, deep enough to bog heavy armour, yet shallow enough to hide men with rifles. Mosquitoes swarm like unpaid interns at a street food stall. Hamid tells the loader they complain too much, because their job description literally includes blood. First light on the 10th. Dust columns rise on the southern road. Patterns appear, steel monsters whose engines sound like freight trains in a tunnel. Hamid aligns the rifle sight until the hull of the lead tank fills the glass. He waits, feels his pulse ticking under the cheek weld, then squeezes. The backblast kicks mud skyward while the shell sprints forward, punching through armor just above the tracks. The tank burps flame, gearbox screaming as it slews sideways. Hamid ducks while 14 tons of metal settles into the paddy like an overfed crocodile. The loader shoves a fresh round. Another pattern advances. Gunner still scanning higher ground. Second shot, second hit. A column of black smoke climbs, catching the sunrise and looking almost pretty if you forget someone is having a very bad day inside it. Hamid radios company HQ, voice calm as if ordering tea. He asks for more ammunition. The reply jokes that he will soon need a parking attendant license. By midday, the battlefield smells of diesel and wet hay. Pakistani crews try skirting the swamp only to find their treads spinning in mud as if the earth itself grabbed the brakes. Hamid keeps shifting position, firing, then ducking behind cane clumps before counterfire can lock on. His recoilless rifle, affectionately tagged with chalk letters, Tank's Nightmare, grows so hot the paint blisters. At one pause, he jokes they should charge rent for all the patterns taking up space. The loader laughs, then slaps another round home. Early afternoon, a pattern swings its turret directly toward Hamid's latest hide. The muzzle flash is a white punch. Dirt erupts around the pit, showering the crew. Hamid wipes grit from his eyes, rises again, and fires. The round strikes the turret ring, blasting it open like a rusted jar lid. The tank commander bails, cloak smouldering. Hamid's loader hoots, tries to high-five, remembers both hands are busy, settles for a shoulder nudge. Moments later, another pattern catches their flash. Its machine gun chatters, stitching the cane with red sparks. Bullets slap the parapet. One rips through the weapon's trail, another ricochets off the shield and whistles past Hamid's ear. The loader reaches for the next shell. Hamid waves him down. He knows the barrel must cool or accuracy will wander. The pause lasts maybe 3 breaths. The enemy gunner does not pause. A burst walks up the pit wall. One round catches Hamid square in the chest. He staggers but does not drop. Instead, he leans into the sight, aligns, fires. The shell flies true. The pattern lurches, turret knocked askew. Only then does Hamid slump backward, blood seeping into uniform cloth already soaked in sweat and powder residue. Medics pull him from the pit, press bandages, whisper hang on. He tries to speak, but air gurgles wetly. Someone leans close and hears him name the loader, remind him to keep the barrel clean. Minutes later his breath stills. On that strip of flooded farmland, he has destroyed at least 3 patterns. Eyewitnesses will later claim 5. Either count turns the world's most modern tank into a statistic, humbled by an old recoilless rifle and a man who refused to blink first. The Pakistani offensive stalls amid burning armour. Newspaper photographers arrive next week to capture twisted hulks rusting beside cane stalks. Headlines call the area the Patton Graveyard. Villagers give directions by saying turn left at the 4th wreck. Post-war committees comb through after-action logs and upgrade Hamid's tally, yet paperwork never equals the field. His widow, Rasulan Bibi, receives India's highest gallantry award, the Param Veer Chakra, in a ceremony where generals try not to look embarrassed that they are saluting a medal without the man. Years pass. A memorial pillar rises near the paddy where smoke once curled. Truck drivers honk twice when they pass, a road custom nobody can trace, but everyone respects. On humid evenings, old farmers tell youngsters about the day steel giants sank in their fields, brought down by a soldier who treated courage like a muscle you keep flexing until the job is done. The cane rustles in night wind, and if you listen between gusts, you might hear an echo of a recoilless rifle thumping, followed by the softer sound of one more impossible shot finding its mark. Marcel Callot and the Prayer in the Quarry. Early spring 1943 in Rennes feels out of step with the calendar. Cherry buds appear on branches, while German posters bark work duty notices on every wall. 22-year-old Marcel Callot folds one of those sheets into quarters and tucks it under a pile of parish newsletters. The notice orders young French men to report for compulsory labour in the Reich. Marcel already works full-time as a typesetter, but moonlights as something else, organiser for the young Christian workers. His apartment floor is strewn with mimeograph stencils, ink rollers, and coffee cups that taste of late-night strategy sessions. Marcel's resistance does not involve explosives. He trains teenagers to hold secret prayer circles, smuggle food to prisoners, and remind occupied neighbourhoods that conscience has sharper edges than barbed wire. The Gestapo pays attention when confidence stays that high. A friend warns him to lie low until the sweep passes. Marcel answers with a shrug. A shepherd does not leave the sheep. April 4th. French police under German command raid the print shop. They find hymn sheets riding the presses and a ledger naming local youth leaders. Marcel is at the typesetter, sleeves rolled, hands black with ink. He admits the hymns are his. The arrest papers list him as dangerous Catholic propagandist, a phrase he later jokes would make his mother proud. Train to Neuengamme camp near Hamburg. Boxcars groan across Belgium while prisoners trade scraps of song. Marcel passes the time transcribing psalms on cigarette papers for men who left their prayer books in police lockers. At Neuengamme, he receives triangle badge number 44267 and assignment to a stone quarry. Guards believe hunger and rock dust erase faith faster than sermons. Marcel puts that belief to the test. The quarry routine is pitiless. Sunrise roll call, 45 minutes of clattering boots and dog barks. March 7 kilometres to a pit that looks like the earth tried to swallow itself. Spend 12 hours levering granite slabs onto rail carts. A man too slow meets a truncheon. A man too weak meets a bullet. Marcel lifts, hauls, and whispers encouragement that travels further than shouts. Fellow inmates start timing their pickaxe swings to the cadence of his whispered rosary. Evenings in the barrack, he gathers a handful of prisoners at the top bunk farthest from the door. They pray softly, share half-remembered gospel passages, and plan tiny rebellions, hide an extra crust for tomorrow, swap places in the infirmary line so a feverish Czech can rest. Guards catch wind of the meetings and search bunks for contraband scripture. They find nothing. Marcel long ago memorized every verse. October brings cold that sneaks through wooden walls like smoke. Tuberculosis stalks the infirmary. Marcel's lungs rattle, but he refuses to stay in bed. He tells the doctor a sick man with no family needs that cot more than he does. By November, he weighs barely 90 pounds, yet still shoulders timber braces down the mineshaft. One evening, a guard demands he stamp on a rosary dropped in the mud. Marcel kneels instead, picks it up, and wipes each bead clean on his sleeve. The guard answers with a rifle butt to the ribs. Several inmates later claim they heard something crack inside him that night, but what cracked sounded more like wood than will. March 1945. Allied bombers rumble overhead. The Reich is shrinking by the day. Guards grow jumpy, discipline harder, food thinner. Marcel's fever spikes. He coughs blood onto the quarry floor and keeps hauling stone until both legs buckle. 2 comrades drag him to the infirmary where straw mats stink of antiseptic irony. He manages one last request. Do not waste your courage on hate. You will need it for tomorrow. Early next morning, he slips away while dawn paints the slit windows pale gold. Neuengamme is liberated 5 weeks later. Survivors testify to a young man who stood nightly prayer watch with lungs that whistled like kettles. British officers, puzzled, note that his file lists no political training, no weapon use, only excessive religious influence. They file the report anyway because the war generated stranger legends, and most turned out true. Marcel's hometown learns of his death in a terse Red Cross telegram. The local bishop writes a homily comparing him to granite, cut by force yet refusing to crumble. Decades later, in 1987, the Church declares Marcel Callot blessed, 1 step short of sainthood. His beatification crowd in St. Peter's Square includes men who still carry quarry dust beneath their fingernails. Walk the quarry site today, and you will find a bronze plaque bolted to a block of raw granite. Rainwater pools in chisel marks that workers once cursed. The plaque reads simply, Marcel Callot, printer, brother, witness. Tour guides mention he carried no rifle, threw no grenade, yet helped unchain spirits behind barbed wire. When buses depart and engines fade, the pit falls silent except for wind humming across stacked stones. Some say the draft sounds like distant singing, as if a thin young voice still marks the rhythm for men lifting burdens bigger than themselves. Alfred Wetzler and the Cigarette Paper Blueprint. Early April 1944. A wet wind rattles the barbed wire of Auschwitz II while SS guards stamp their boots against the nightly chill. Inside Block 10, prisoner 29709, Alfred Wetzler checks the stub of a stolen pencil and whispers through cracked lips. Page 29 finished. Beside him, Rudolf Verber folds the latest sheet so it fits inside a Czech tobacco tin no wider than a matchbox. The pages are cigarette paper, each covered edge to edge with tiny numbers, train arrivals, gas chamber capacities, crematorium schedules. If the camp is a factory of death, these pages are its balance sheets. Wetzler met Verber months earlier, when both worked in the Canada warehouses where luggage from murdered arrivals was sorted. Among broken dolls and wedding photos, they realized the camp hid its statistics behind anonymity. Escape would not be enough. Someone had to leave with receipts. They spent winter evenings memorizing every step between selection platform and furnace room, counting bolts on doors, listening to boiler men gripe about coal tonnage. Each fact went onto a mental shelf until a sympathetic capo smuggled them the pencil. The escape plan uses habits of German routine against itself. Every day a patrol paces the south fence at exactly 17 minutes past 4. At that moment, the guard closest to the woodyard lights a cigarette, looks away, and flicks ash into the cinders. Wetzler and Verber time his ritual down to the second. On 7th April, they slip into a small hollow inside a lumber pile stacked just outside the inner perimeter. Fellow Slovak prisoners scatter tobacco soaked in petrol around the pile to confuse guard dogs. For the next 3 nights, Wetzler and Werber lie motionless under planks while search parties circle. They hold a tin cup to collect condensation from the boards above, rationing each swallow. When the sentries finally declare the men drowned in the nearby river, the camp search halts. At dusk on day 4, they wriggle free, clothes stiff with resin, and head south toward the Slovak border. Travel is a staccato rhythm. Crawl through ditches, sprint across clearings, dive into thorn hedges at the sound of engines. V.R. Bay carries the tin under his shirt, its papers wrapped in oilskin torn from a sausage wrapper. Wetzler navigates by the North Star and childhood memories of hill contours. After 10 nights they reach Žilina and present themselves to the Slovak Jewish Working Group. The local rabbi, expecting rumours, instead receives a 32-page dossier that turns his hands to ice. Typists work through the night producing carbon copies. Diplomatic couriers store duplicates inside false-bottom briefcases bound for Geneva, Budapest, and the Vatican. Within weeks, the summary called the Auschwitz Protocols reaches Allied intelligence. British and American newspapers print the first verified diagrams of gas chambers. Pope Pius XII cables urgent inquiries to Berlin. In occupied Hungary, Regent Miklos Horthy reads the report and briefly slows deportations, saving thousands. Wetzler does not wait for applause. He adopts the alias Joseph Lanik, joins a partisan unit in the Mala Fatra Mountains, and guides sabotage raids on railway bridges feeding the front. Werber will later write a memoir, but Wetzler keeps silent, preferring the company of stray dogs at forest outposts. War ends, uniforms change, but Europe in 1945 has little patience for witness testimonies that disrupt reconstruction schedules. Wetzler returns to Slovakia, works as a clerk, then as a quality inspector in a shoe factory. Official forms list no awards, only late arrival deductions when asthma forces him to pedal slower to work. He marries, raises 2 daughters, and tucks the original tobacco tin inside a dresser drawer beneath bus tickets and unpaid electric bills. Occasionally, journalists visit. One asks why he never moved to a larger city. Wetzler answers, "I have already seen the largest city I care to remember." When another suggests his heroism deserves plaques, he smiles thinly. If the world had believed the first plaque, maybe we would not need more. In 1988, Alfred Wetzler dies of lung failure in the town of Svatý Jur. The funeral draws fewer than 50 mourners, mostly relatives and former partisans. No government delegation attends. A neighbour supplies a wooden cross, carving only his legal post-war name. The tobacco tin remains in the dresser until historians cataloguing Werber's estate request artifacts. The tin travels to Yad Vashem, where curators mount it under glass. Beside it, a small card explains that 32 pages on cigarette paper forced the world to confront arithmetic written in ashes. Today, visitors to Auschwitz walk past a replica barrack where a plaque names Wetzler and Werber as the first escapees to deliver proof of systematic murder. Many pause only a moment before hurrying to the next exhibit. Yet sometimes, late in the afternoon, when tours thin and wind rattles the birch trees, a guide will tell the longer version. how two men hid under timber with the sun angling through slats, holding their breath so the dogs would not hear, praying that a pencil's worth of facts might outweigh silence thicker than smoke. Simo-Häyhä, the winter ghost with the iron face. The Karelian Forest, December 1939. Dawn never truly arrives this far north. It only swaps black for a dim blue that makes every spruce trunk look like a rifle barrel. Soviet troops advancing toward the village of Kola tighten their greatcoats, convinced no living thing could lurk in 37 degrees below zero. They are wrong. 30 meters inside the tree line, Private Simo-Häyhä lies flat on a birch bark mat, face veiled with a thin layer of packed snow. From a distance, he resembles a frost-blown stump. Häyhä is a farmer and competitive rifleman from Rautjärvi who stands barely 5'3". Friends back home call him Simuna and tease that he has the voice of a coffee grinder. None of that matters in this light. What matters is his Mosin Nagant iron sights, breath control learned from deer hunting, and a habit of banking snow in front of the muzzle to hide the puff of vapour that gives away most snipers. Through the notch of his rear sight, he counts 4 Soviet scouts stepping past a fallen pine. Each wears a fur hat that glows faintly against dark trunks. Häyhä exhales, heart rate steady at 60 beats a minute. He presses the curved trigger. Crack. The lead scout drops hard, steam curling from the exit wound. Crack again. The second man tumbles. The remaining 2 soldiers spin, panic, and fire blind into the shadows. By the time they think to dive for cover, Häyhä has already inched backward into deeper snow, melted frost refreezing over his tracks. This is his routine for 84 days of the Winter War. He never uses a scope because the glass can fog or catch sunlight. He never fires twice from the same hollow. He carries antique pocket bread and sugar cubes for energy, because field rations freeze into bricks. Somewhere between mid-December and early March, he racks up hits faster than headquarters can verify. Frontline rumours claim 300, then 4. Soviet command dubs him Belaya Smrt, the White Death, a nickname that sounds like a children's ghost story until supply officers start issuing extra armour panels for patrol leaders. On 6 March 1940, Häyhä's luck blinks. He slips into a spruce copse south of Kola, just as Soviet artillery switches targets. Shrapnel chews branches overhead, spitting splinters like throwing knives. A fragment the size of a walnut punches through his musk and ploughs into his left cheek. Snow turns pink. Häyhä stays conscious long enough to crawl behind a boulder, pack snow against the wound, and scribble a coordinate on his map for the relief sniper. Then the world folds inward. Comrades haul him by toboggan to a field infirmary, where surgeons carve out metal and shattered jawbone in a tent lit by bicycle lamps. For a week, he drifts between morphine twilight and the rattle of sleet on canvas. When he wakes fully, the doctor hands him a mirror. The lower half of his face is swaddled in gauze, the nose flattened, teeth visible through a split lip that will never quite close again. Häyhä blinks once, asks who won at Kola, and when told the line held, he closes his eyes and sleeps without further complaint. The Winter War ends 12 days later with a ceasefire that draws new borders but keeps Finland sovereign. Official tallies credit Häyhä with 505 confirmed kills, all iron sight, all in less than 100 days. Journalists flock to his hospital cot. He answers every question with the politeness of a church usher, says he merely aimed well and let the rifle speak. Asked what made him so effective, he lists 3 things: practice, patience, and the snow that never stopped helping him hide. After months of reconstructive surgery, he returns to his farm. Wheat fields replace foxholes. The Mosin goes back to the gun cabinet. He breeds hunting dogs, judges local shooting contests, and rarely mentions the war unless someone asks about winter weather. Each spring village children see a man with a scarred smile trimming apple trees and hear whispers that he once hunted tanks with a rifle older than their fathers. Simo Heihe lives to 97, outlasting every general who wrote his name in dispatches. At his funeral in 2002, Finnish soldiers fold a blue and white flag over the coffin while the forest outside the church holds its breath under fresh snow. The honorary rifle volley echoes across the tree line. 3 shots spaced so cleanly one officer swears he feels the old sniper's nod of approval. Visitors to the Kolar battlefield today find little beyond rusted shell fragments and a weather-stained sign that reads, "Kolar Keste, Kolar holds." Step a few meters into the bush, kneel, and brush aside the top crust of snow, and you may uncover a shallow depression exactly rifle length long. There is no plaque, only silence and the faint memory of a man who taught winter itself to pull the trigger. Jacqueline Lucas and the double grenade dive. Iwo Jima, 20 February 1945. The volcanic sand is so fine it swallows boots to the ankle, and the air smells of sulfur that refuses to cool. At the bottom of a ravine, a 4-man Marine fire team edges forward, rifles up, hearts pounding in a rhythm set by nearby machine gun bursts. The youngest in the file is Private First Class Jacqueline Harold Lucas, age 17, built like a middle linebacker in a uniform that still looks new. Lucas should not be here. He forged his mother's signature at 14 to join the Marine Corps Reserve, then stowed away on an assault transport when commanders kept him stateside as a cook. Caught mid-Pacific, he talked the captain into letting him transfer to an infantry unit headed for Iwo with a grin that promised trouble. This morning he leapt from a Higgins boat and sprinted inland before roll call could catch up. Now, he and 3 companions crouch behind a terrace of jagged basalt. Japanese soldiers occupy a trench 10 meters uphill. The Marines toss 1 grenade. It sails high, bounces, rolls back harmlessly. A second attempt draws a burst of rifle fire that clips Lucas's canteen clean off his belt. The squad leader signals a rush. Lucas surges around the corner, almost collides with an enemy soldier, and fires from the hip. The rifle kicks, the opponent crumples, and 2 grenades tumble from his pouch. One lands at Lucas's feet, the other skitters a yard away. Time splinters into shards. Lucas sees the nearest grenade first, black casing already spitting sparks. He shouts, "Grenade!" rams the butt of his rifle onto the second one to wedge it deeper into soft ash, then hurls himself onto the first. His helmet clatters away as he presses the iron globe under his torso, arms clamped tight, chin buried in sand. A heartbeat later, the second grenade pops. Shrapnel chews the cliff. Before echoes fade, the grenade beneath Lucas erupts. The blast lifts his body, tears open his jacket, peppers his back with fragments that flatten against ribs like thrown nails. Pain feels distant, as if the ocean surf has drowned it. He tries to roll over, but sees nothing except swirling dust. A voice above yells they are advancing, asks if he can move. Lucas answers with a thumbs up, then realizes the gesture is only in his mind because his right hand will not obey. The other Marines charge past, shouting that corpsmen are on the way. Lucas blinks grit from his eyes, notices the trench is no longer firing, and lets himself fade for a moment into a darkness that smells of hot metal. Minutes later, a corpsman kneels beside him, slides plasma tubing into a vein, and whispers that transport is coming. Lucas asks if the others made it. The corpsman nods and lies that all are fine, though one carries a peppering of shrapnel that future bragging rights will turn into legend. Evacuation chain, stretcher to beachhead, beachhead to hospital ship Samaritan, Samaritan to Guam. Surgeons count more than 200 metal fragments. They remove almost half. The rest stay because digging deeper risks organs already bruised. Lucas regains consciousness a day later, asks for ice cream, then apologizes for bleeding on the sheets. When a nurse calls him hero, he laughs and says he was just on KP duty for grenades. Back in Hawaii, doctors debate whether one person can hold a Medal of Honor and a draft card violation in the same hand. Bureaucracy yields to valor. On 5 October 1945, President Truman places the sky blue ribbon around Lucas's neck. The clasp settles over a chest still quilted with scars. Reporters crowd him afterward, wanting tidy quotes. Lucas shrugs, says he had lived 17 good years and figured his buddies deserved at least the same. Civilian life proves restless. He tries college, leaves, joins the army to jump from airplanes because walking feels too slow, then shifts to the paratrooper reserve. In 1961, his chute tangles after a malfunction at 1,200 feet. He cuts away, pulls the reserve at 600, lands hard, breaks nothing, walks it off. Someone jokes he is magnetized to explosions and free falls. Lucas smiles, pockets the line, and keeps moving. He passes away in 2008, aged 80, the oldest living Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. At the funeral in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, Marines fold a flag with care they usually reserve for fragile china. During taps, the bugle note hangs longer than usual over the cemetery oaks. It almost sounds like the pause between the two grenade blasts on a volcanic island 6 decades earlier. Today, on a ridge near the black sands of Iwo Jima, wind shifts fine ash into new ripples every season. Somewhere beneath those dunes rest bits of iron that once tried to kill 3 Marines. A small bronze marker lists Jacqueline Lucas's name and the words above and beyond. Visitors sometimes miss it, distracted by the towering memorial a mile away. Those who do notice tend to stand a little longer than the tour schedule allows, imagining a teenage Marine choosing in less than a breath to become a living shield so that others could keep climbing toward the summit. The Torch at Pont de l'Artibonite, Northern Saint-Domingue, September 1791. The humid night drapes over cane fields like a damp blanket, muffling every sound except the hiss of the Artibonite River as it pushes against wooden pilings of an old French toll bridge. Across that span, columns of colonial troops march toward the rebellious plain of Enbar, musket barrels glinting in torchlight. Near the far bank, an enslaved field hand named Henri crouches behind a broken cart axle, clutching a single oil-soaked torch and a pouch of gunpowder filched from a planter's storehouse. His clothes are sugar-stained, his back scarred, his resolve iron. Henry is no officer, no priest of Vodou drums, only one of thousands who learned that freedom sits on the other side of fear. 2 nights earlier, he watched French soldiers torch a village that had declared itself libre. He pulled 2 toddlers from a burning hut, one alive, one already silent, then carried the family into the mangroves where rebels counted their dead by lantern glow. Someone whispered that the next column would cross at Pont de l'Artibonite before dawn. Henry stood up and said a bridge can carry only one story at a time, either theirs or ours. He took the torch. Midnight passes. Clouds part enough for moonlight to rim every uniform button on the advancing line. Henri waits until the leading ranks reach the midpoint, boots thudding on planks warped by decades of flooding. He steps onto the road behind them, strikes flint to steel once, twice. Sparks kiss the oil rag, flame blossoms, wind snaps it like a banner. A sentry turns, eyes widening. Henry hurls the torch onto barrels of tar stacked under the rail, then upends the powder pouch along the beam, sparks snowing around him. The blast is not clean or cinematic. It stutters, coughs, then roars as tar ignites, boards buckle, nails sing out like angry crickets. French soldiers scramble, some firing blindly into smoke, others stumbling toward the shore they left. Henry runs toward the blaze instead, shoulder down, pushing a loose barrel deeper into the fire so heat reaches the support joist. Flames climb his trousers, lick the hem of his cotton shirt, fuse cloth to skin. Still he pushes. One musket ball finds him, punching between ribs. Another clips an ear. He barely notices through the roar in his skull. The bridge's centre span groans, timbers separating like rotten teeth. Henry uses the last of his breath to shove the burning barrel against the final brace. Wood snaps. The central planks drop, carrying him and 6 colonial soldiers into the river. Water extinguishes nothing. Tar floats, still burning, lighting the current in orange ribbons. Soldiers on the banks shout orders that no one can hear over the rush of collapse. By dawn, the bridge is a charred carcass, its broken spine jutting from blackened pilings. The column retreats, forced to march 20 kilometers upstream in search of another crossing. Those lost hours give rebel bands time to fortify plantations west of Cap Francais, time enough to turn a rolling mutiny into a revolution that newspapers in Paris will soon describe with words like unprecedented and unstoppable. Villagers find Henri's body snagged against reeds at a bend where the water slows. Burned skin peels away from the wrists, yet the fingers still coil as if holding an invisible torch. They bury him on a low rise above the river, marking the grave with a carved cane stalk that reads simply Libet. Stories travel faster than tides. Within a month, field hands along the northern plain greet one another with a raised fist curled like a burning brand, the gesture of Henri's final push. Years later, when diplomats gather to sign documents acknowledging the new nation of Haiti, some remember hearing of an unnamed rebel who turned a bridge into a fuse. His name never appears in official decrees, but traders navigating the Artibonite steer wide of the midpoint where scorched pilings remain, visible at low water like blackened finger bones. Boatmen tell young deckhands that if you pass at midnight, you may glimpse a single flame dancing on the ruined span, then plunging into darkness. They do not agree whether it is warning or invitation, only that it reminds every traveller who really wrote the river's newest chapter.